Ages ago, when I was a boy, one of my favorite things to do would be to have sleepovers with my friends, especially my friend Joe. Joe had the coolest house layout. It was big and it had this huge basement with a pool table, air hockey table, and the entire basement looped around in a big circle. And we'd often ride his scooters around the loop in the basement while on our sugar rushes after hours of playing video games and eating junk food. The best part was his parents could never hear us down there, as they slept all the way upstairs. I'll never forget the night that my mom dropped me off at Joe's house after dinner. It was the night before a holiday, so we didn't have school the next day. Joe and I went straight to the basement and started playing one of his new video games on his PlayStation 1, when suddenly the door to the laundry room in the back creaked open. We paused the game and turned around to look, and yes, the door was now cracked open. I told Joe to go check it out. He said it's fine, it happens sometimes. To be honest though, sometimes at night alone in his basement, Joe and I would get spooked. I told him to go shut the door because something about having that door open leading into a big pitch black laundry room was uncomfortable. I think he agreed because he got up to close it. After a while of playing video games, I started riding Joe's bike around the loop of the basement, which honestly was a lot more fun than it sounds. But then something else happened. There was a noise, almost like the sound of a laundry machine door being banged or closed. It came from the laundry room again, obviously. This time Joe and I ran up the stairs freaked out, and Joe called his dad to come check the laundry room. His dad opened the door to the laundry room, had a quick 5-second look, and calmly said there's no one in there. So he went back upstairs to bed, and Joe and I continued to hang out for another hour or two. Then it came time to go to sleep. There were 2 couches down there, one in front of the TV, and then another towards the back of the basement by the bar. I slept on the couch towards the back of the basement. I didn't sleep long though. I woke up and it was still pitch black in the basement, no light shining through the small basement windows. It was still the middle of the night. I rubbed my eyes and sat up after getting this weird feeling of being watched. "Joe?" I said, just checking if he was awake. After saying his name, I heard and saw something moving in the darkness to the laundry room. And then the door creaked shut. I jumped off the couch to wake up Joe, but when I got to his couch, he wasn't there. That's when I became wise to what was going on. Joe was trying to scare me. I tiptoed to the door of the laundry room. I figured I would reverse it on him and scare him instead. I put my hand on the doorknob, and after a little mental buildup, I yanked the door open and went inside screaming. I turned on the light to the room, but Joe wasn't in there. Where could he be hiding? In that moment, I was beyond confused. I knew he had to be in the room. Then I noticed something through the glass of the dryer machine. I walked over to it and knelt down. Someone was in the dryer machine, crunched up and like a ball. You know how dryer machine doors usually have a sort of tinted glass that's hard to see through? Well, while I knew there was a person in there, it took me a few seconds to catch on that the person that was in the dryer machine looking back at me was not Joe. It was some grown man. I started screaming and ran all the way upstairs to Joe's parents' room. Everyone in the house came out from their bedrooms in response, including Joe. Joe apparently was having a hard time falling asleep on the couch, so he went upstairs to his bedroom. I yelled there was someone hiding in the dryer machine. As Joe's dad started his way storming to the basement, somebody ran through the living room and out the front door. Joe's mom let out a scream as his dad ran outside in his slippers to try to catch the man. Of course, being that he was only in slippers, he didn't have a chance. When he came back, Joe's mom had already called the cops. When the cops came, they asked me if there was anything specific that I could make out about the man. All I could say was that he was wearing dark clothes. Joe and I slept in his room. I slept on the floor with a blanket, and we kept the door locked. We took a break from the sleepovers for a while after that. This happened quite some time ago. In fact, it happened back in July 2013. It was my 13th birthday party, and my friends and I had been to Manchester for the day, before heading back to my house for a sleepover. A couple of them had stayed over before, but some hadn't, so I wanted to make a good impression. We all decided to sleep downstairs that night, as there wasn't enough room in my bedroom. We gathered our sleeping bags on the living room floor, watched cheesy rom-coms, and ate junk food until around 1 a.m. So we decided to hit the sack after our third movie. We turned off the lights with the exception of one, as although we didn't like to admit it then, we were a little afraid of the dark. It's a common thing to lie awake and chat at a sleepover after you say you're going to sleep. We were in the middle of whispering to each other who we thought our celebrity lookalikes were, when we heard it. A loud knock on our window cut through our conversation. "What was that?" said Emma, one of my friends. "It's probably just my dad playing a prank or something," I said. Although this whole situation was kind of freaking me out, my dad had done this type of thing before, so I assumed it must have been him. We were beginning to calm down when suddenly another forceful knock came upon the window. This made some of my friends scream. I assured everyone that, like I said, it was probably just my dad being goofy. So I went over to the window to catch him red-handed. The curtains were closed, so I had to pull a section of them back to see who was outside. As I did, I came face to face with a man who was most certainly not my dad. This man was bald with very thin eyebrows, and he had a missing tooth. He was sort of hunched over, and he looked at me with widened, glassy eyes. I immediately screamed and closed the curtain. At this point, my friends and I were pretty hysterical, and Emma began visibly shaking in fear. My parents were upstairs, so instinctively, I ran up to find them. As I got upstairs, my mom was talking to someone from her window. I didn't quite catch their conversation, but she told me what happened soon after. She said that she heard the knocking too, and when she looked out of her window to see who it was, the man looked up and asked her if she had seen a friend of his. I can't remember the name of the guy she said she was looking for, so we'll call him Paul. He kept asking for him over and over. "Have you seen Paul? Where is Paul? Has Paul been here?" Of course, my mom said she didn't know anyone named Paul. Eventually, she had to ask him to leave us alone, as he just kept wandering around our driveway. As the man finally left, I went back downstairs to calm my friends down. In retrospect, I feel bad for leaving them alone down there when some weird stranger was on our property. We all settled back down after that. However, my mom's maternal instincts kicked in, so she wanted to make sure he was gone completely. She left briefly to go around the block in her car to make sure he wasn't still in the area. The street was dimly lit by impractical streetlights, so she had to put her high beams on. As she was driving, she saw someone dash across the middle of the road. Thinking it was just a kid, she just kept driving until the man who was at our window appeared again. But this time, he practically jumped in front of my mom's car. My mom quickly slammed on the brakes, but before she could confront him, he disappeared off into the night. We never found out who that guy was or what his true intentions were, and thankfully, we never saw him again. So much for wanting to make a good impression. My friend Jake slept over at my house one night when we were 12, and because of that, he may have possibly saved my life. It was a snowy weekend night. We watched a couple Christmas movies in my living room. My mom would bring us snacks and hot cocoa. She was always really nice to my friends when I had them over. My mom had to go to sleep kind of early because she worked. She and my dad had just recently divorced. By around 12, Jake and I went to my room, where we played Pokemon on our Game Boy Advances for a little. I don't remember much after that, besides falling asleep a little while later. I woke up in my bed to the room being extremely cold, and also feeling really thirsty. I went to the kitchen downstairs to get a cup of water. I noticed how much colder it had become upstairs as opposed to downstairs. I went back to my bed and tucked myself in. As I lay there trying to fall back asleep, I realized Jake was breathing weird, like a deeper, heavier breathing. It went on for some time, and after making a note of it in my head, it was all I could focus on, so I eventually threw a pillow at him. As he woke up, I told him to stop breathing so loud. He was confused as he looked up at me in my bed. He said, "What are you talking about?" I told him to just lower the volume of his breathing noises, as he was borderline snoring. Jake shifted his focus from me to down below my bed, and then he screamed. He crawled backwards until his back was pushing up against my dresser. I yelled, "What is it?" I hopped off my bed and looked under it where he was staring at. There was a middle-aged man with long hair laying underneath my bed, and he had his finger up to his lips saying, "Shh." It was a surreal sight to say the least. I felt like my heart was beating 200 beats per minute. The man whispered, "I know your mom. I'm here to see her." He started crawling out from under the bed. At that same moment, Jake and I ran from the room, screaming for my mom. We got to my mom's room and locked her bedroom door behind us. She was immediately distressed and confused by our screams. I barely had enough time to yell, "There's a man under my bed," before the doorknob to my mom's room started twisting and shaking. Then the sounds of the doorknob failing to turn shifted to heavy, aggressive bangs at the door. My mom ran to her phone and called 911. She was on the phone already in tears, while also screaming at the man on the other side of the door to leave us alone. The man tried kicking the door in, but I think when he heard my mom on the phone, he left the house. We were all in shock. It took the police only a couple minutes to arrive, at which point the coast was clear. The biggest window in our house, which was the window to the upstairs spare bedroom, was lifted up completely, which explained the cool air entering the house upstairs. That also explained the man's point of entry. I told my mom that man claimed he knew her, but she had no idea who this man could have been. My mom dropped Jake off home, and then she and I slept at my aunt and uncle's house for the rest of the night. The next day, my uncle installed a stronger lock on that upstairs window. This was like 16 years ago now. At this point, it's just a distant, haunting memory. But we never figured out who that man could have been, or how he could have possibly known my mother. I've always loved thunderstorms ever since I was a kid, and so does my 6-year-old son. Anytime there's a storm, my son and I will sit in the backyard under the gazebo and just watch and listen. This was on a hot, stormy August night in Florida. As soon as we heard the first strike of lightning in the living room, my son jumped up and said, "Let's go sit outside." I followed him outside, where we ran from the back door to the gazebo, getting pretty wet on the way. It was already pouring. I have a nice setup under my backyard gazebo. It has a mini bar, a few wicker sofas, a TV, and mini fire pit. As we usually would, I turned on the fire pit and TV, and my son and I just laid back and relaxed, listening to the sound of the pouring rain and constant thunder. The thunder would get louder and louder as we sat out there, and the time between the flashes of lightning and cracks of thunder was getting shorter and shorter. The bulk of the storm was getting closer to us. The lightning was getting so bright and frequent that it was genuinely starting to light up the entire backyard anytime it flashed. And my backyard is big, with woods covering 2 edges of it. Perhaps after the biggest flash of lightning yet, my son squealed and pointed out towards the backyard. "What?" I said, to which he said he saw someone standing in the backyard. I stood up and walked to the edge of the gazebo. I couldn't see anything in the dark, so I was waiting for another flash of lightning. The next few flashes of lightning were too small to fully see into the yard, but when the next earth-rumbling flash of lightning struck, I saw what he meant. There was someone indeed standing out in my backyard by the woods. I told my son to go rush inside and turn on the backyard lights. He did so without question, and I stood in place waiting. About 10 seconds later, all of the backyard lights were on, but I didn't see the person way out in my backyard anymore. I waited for more lightning to maybe help see. But even with the lightning, I didn't see them anymore. They were gone. He, she, whatever, I didn't know. All I knew was that there was someone walking around my yard, and that didn't sit right with me. I went inside the house and locked all the doors, but kept the backyard lights on. I even turned on the front yard lights too. I didn't want to tell my wife, but my son had already done so anyway, so when she was all concerned and asking if we should phone the police, I lied to her and told her I saw the person out there leave. She asked if it was a man or woman, to which I replied woman, as it sounded less scary. For the rest of the night, the three of us watched a movie in the living room, with the storm still overhead. Eventually it was my son's bedtime, so my wife tucked him in and then came back to the living room and we started watching something else. We still heard the thunder outside. Eventually I went back to the den to turn off the outside lights, front and backyard. When I went up to the living room, my son was standing at his bedroom door, scared, saying there's someone at his window. My wife and I looked at each other and yelled, "What?" I pulled him away from his doorway, and then I stood at the doorway, looking at the window, waiting for the lightning. When the lightning struck, no one was at his window, but I believed him. Someone was out there, that much was already established. I told my wife and child to stay inside while I go out and look, even though my wife didn't want me to do that. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and stormed out into the rain after turning all the lights back on. I started in the front of the house, then worked my way to the side, then the back. I looked under the tables, in the gazebo, under the deck, and when I thought the backyard was clear, the last side to check was the right side of the house. I would begin to walk towards the side of the house, and instantly saw a person in a hood, but I only saw half of their face and head. They were peering around the corner of the house. Most of their face and all of their body was hidden behind the wall. If I had to guess, I'd say it looked more like a man. I screamed, but I also ran in that direction with the bat raised up. The person disappeared behind the corner. When I made it past that corner, they were gone. Even with all the lights on, I didn't see anyone there. I went back inside and told the two of them that it was okay, that I chased the man away. But my wife did not like to hear that it was a man. I made sure to close all the blinds in the house now. Luckily, we weren't bothered again by that man. My son slept in our bed with us that night just because he was so scared, and I understand why. I didn't see it, but I can only imagine how scarring it was to see a man standing at his window at the young age of 6. The city in which I live almost never gets any rainfall, so when we do, it's a pretty exciting thing. The kids like to go out and play around, the farmers are thankful that their crops will thrive, and it's just a nice piece of scenery. The last time there was a big thunderstorm, my friends and I were all playing some game together, though I can't remember which one it was. I knew the thunderstorm was rolling in when everybody's microphone played the same sound of the first thunder, and it was big. When I heard it, I thought it was a gunshot or firework. Then I saw the lightning outside my window, and hopped over to my bed to see the storm forming. What I saw was much more unsettling. Across the street from me was a man. He wore a gray hoodie and some jeans. He looked fairly tall, though not too muscular, and he was just standing there. I couldn't tell if he was looking at me or not, as his face was obscured. Then he started to walk down the street, so he wasn't looking at me. I felt relieved, yet still a bit paranoid. I got back on the game with my friends and we continued to play. About 15 minutes later, the storm had fully started. I told the 4 of them I was leaving to go watch the storm, and I'd be back in a while. I walked out front and stood under the porch, watching as the lightning flashed and the rain struck the ground in a soothing rhythm. Then I looked down the street to my left, and there he was, the man standing at the corner of the street. I was scared a bit, but I still had my head trying to reason this out. It's not uncommon for townspeople to stand out in the rain. It is a rare occurrence after all, so I paid little attention to it. After about 5 more minutes, I decided to go back inside, and as I opened the door, I turned to where the man had stood. He was gone now, which made for a more eerie scene. I walked inside, where 2 of my little siblings were dancing to a Bubble Guppies song. My other 2 siblings were in their rooms, doing who knows what. I went back to my room, but instead of playing the game again, I decided to go do something else, though I didn't know what to do. Then I heard the all too familiar buzzing of my phone when I received a text. I picked it up and opened the messenger. It was an unknown number. They had sent me 2 texts. The first read, "Have you forgotten?" and the next read, "I know you didn't." My first thoughts were the man that I had seen outside, but then I thought of how slim those chances were. How would he have gotten my number? Why would he target me for whatever he was trying to do? I decided my friends were pulling a prank on me and decided to check. I went to the group chat and asked if anyone had been prank texting me. They all swore that they weren't, though it's hard to tell over text if they were lying. I decided to believe them and went to watch TV. Some time had passed, how long exactly I don't remember, when there came a ring at the door. It was way too late for visitors, so who could this be? Maybe the postal service? I checked the time on my phone, 12:19, definitely too late for visitors. I peered through my blinds in an effort to see who it was, but I couldn't. The rain was coming down so hard it was like a blanket of mist was everywhere. Then one of the gunshot thunders sounded. My head slammed into the window, making a thud sound. There was movement by the door. It was a person running off. I could only assume it was the man from earlier. No, I knew it was the man from earlier. How could these events not all add up? I wanted to call the cops, but I had no proof the man had been there. He just left without a trace. I decided to try and sleep, and got about 3 hours worth, when a gunshot thunder woke me up. I shot up, then froze. Then I relaxed a little, when another loud bang sounded, but this one wasn't thunder. This one came from my window. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't let whoever was out there know I was awake. But what if they knew? I decided to just take a peek through my blinds. What I saw next was probably the scariest thing I'd ever seen. It was the man with his hands pressed against the window, and I could only assume he was staring at me. The scariest part was his mouth. His eyes were mainly covered in shadow, but there was enough light to see his mouth, and it was smiling. It was such a big, maniacal smile I didn't even know was possible for a human to make. Then he stood and left. Just like that, he walked into the rainy night from which he came. I sat awake in my chair, but I guess I fell asleep somewhere along the road. When I woke, I was confused as to why I was in my chair. Then I remembered the previous night's events, and I darted to the window for whatever reason. When I pulled the blinds up, there was one thing I could see. A small piece of paper taped to my window. On it were 3 words that have now haunted my dreams. Have you forgotten? I haven't had any further experience with the man, and I hope I don't have to. It was a night I was working late. The weather outside was awful, and I was just leaving my job to go home. It was about 12 a.m. during a thunderstorm. I used to drive a 2005 Ford Fusion, a little car not ideal for crappy weather and roads. I was taking my usual route home, and the rain was so bad that even having the windshield wipers on the highest setting didn't help that much. I still could barely see. I was going 40 miles per hour on a 55 mile per hour road. That's how bad it was. There were no other cars around me. And when I least expected it, through the water building up too quickly for my wipers to handle, thus partially blocking my view, I saw someone dressed in white running across the road from one side of the woods to the other. I saw them almost too late. I had to slam on the brakes and swerve to avoid hitting them. I swerved and lost control onto the grass before crashing head-on into a tree. The airbag deployed and my whole body jerked forward into it. I couldn't even believe what just happened at first. I was in shock. I knew immediately my car was totaled, but when I slowly started to accept what just happened, I started to look around my car for the person that just ran across the road randomly. I was currently in the middle of a quiet highway with no buildings nearby for miles and no cars to be seen. There should have been no one walking around here, especially in this weather this late. It was a work night and extremely late, so I was nervous nobody would pick up. The first person I called was my brother, who didn't pick up after several attempts. He was definitely asleep. I tried my sister next, with equal results. I didn't want to have to involve either of my parents in this, but with no other option, I called my dad on his house phone, which was sure to wake him up. He picked up on the last ring, and I explained the situation. I told him I'd need assistance, and didn't know what number to call for a tow. After ensuring that I was okay and that I had no injuries, he gave me the number for our family's roadside assistance company to call. He said he'd get dressed and drive over to me. His house was about 10 to 15 minutes away. My dad also told me to get out of the car to look for whoever was crossing the street and to keep my doors locked. When we hung up, I stayed in the car, nervously looking around every window, though not seeing much because of the pouring rain. I truly was so scared that I was about to piss my pants, knowing someone was out there, wondering if they intentionally ran in front of my car. I called our roadside assistance company, and they were sending a tow truck right away. About 10 minutes passed since the phone call with my dad now, and I texted my dad, "Are you on your way yet?" He texted back, "Yes." I had my hazards on, though I'm sure the car being ran into a tree would help enough in finding me. I turned to my right, as if I instinctively knew someone was there. and I jumped out of my seat and screamed at the top of my lungs as I felt like my heart dropped out of my body. There was a soaking wet man in white, looking into my car with his mouth hung open in an O shape and his eyes squinted. He then put his hands on the glass and started to rub the windows. I didn't know what he was doing, but I yelled at him to go away. He started to try opening the locked door, and when it wouldn't open, he started to pound his fists on the glass. He did all of this with his mouth still hanging open in that weird O shape. I didn't know what to do other than call my dad again. He picked up, and I basically cried into the phone that there was a random man trying to get into my car. My dad screamed into the phone not to open the doors, and that he's almost here. He stayed on the line with me as the man outside started to hit the window with his elbow, causing me to scream and my dad to panic into the phone. Surprisingly, the glass didn't shatter, and as if my prayers were answered, I saw headlights approaching from down the road and pull up behind my car. The man outside looked to the other car, which happened to be my dad's, and as my dad stepped out of his car and charged at this creep, the creep tried to run away into the woods, but my dad tackled him, and I swear beat his face in to the point that his face would have been completely covered in blood if it weren't for the heavy rain washing some of it away. He held the man down as I called the police. The tow truck driver arrived on scene first, and he was of course shocked at the unusual scenario he just pulled up to. Police showed up not long after that, and it was the most satisfying feeling seeing that man arrested. Not only was he charged criminally, but we pressed charges for the damages to my car. His name is Marcus Green. I never showed up to court. My father and our lawyer did. I didn't want to see that man ever again. The disturbing face he was making, along with seeing him striking my car to break in, is something that will stay with me for a long time. My wife and I got married in the Church of the Little Flower in Coral Gables, Florida in 2017. We invited all of our close friends and family, including the family that neither of us really liked, because that's just what you're supposed to do. My wife Allie has this estranged aunt Chelsea that no one in her family is really close with. She used to have serious drug problems. It spiraled her down a path that just led to a rift between her and the rest of the family. Well, Aunt Chelsea was invited to the wedding, and when she showed up, she surprisingly came with a date, but unsurprisingly, he didn't look like the kind of guy you want to bring home to mom and dad. Right from the first time I laid eyes on him, I knew he was different, not in a pleasant, quirky way. After the wedding ceremony, of course, came picture time. The 6 bridesmaids, 6 groomsmen, and my wife and I all went to this nice backyard section of the church campus to have pictures taken by the hired photographer. Some close family from both sides came along as well to watch while most others went to the party hall. Aunt Chelsea and her date came to watch us take pictures as well. This was when I first got his name, Rob. The two of them were making everyone uncomfortable, like everyone in the bridal party would joke around and we'd genuinely laugh. Then either Chelsea or Rob would yell out these weird, inappropriate things. They just kept doing it to the point where they created awkward silences, and all of us were just internally cringing, dreading what weird things they'd say next. It got very awkward very quickly, let's just say that, to the point I wanted them to leave altogether. Anyway, we eventually finished with pictures. Then we migrated to Comber Hall, the party hall connected to the church, where food and drinks were being served. Being the groom, all the attention is on you at all times. You barely have a chance to sit down and gather your thoughts or even eat. Every second I had someone else coming up to congratulate me, and eventually that person was Rob. He shook my hand again, his breath terrible, and his arms scarred up. He wasn't wearing a long-sleeved shirt, rather a stained gray polo. He seemed like a filthy person all around. He started talking to me with this loud, almost demeaning tone. I did my best to just be polite, and eventually he walked back to Chelsea. This was the last time I saw him that day. Eventually I saw Chelsea sitting by herself at the table, so I asked Allie where that Rob guy went. She had no idea either. After a while of Chelsea sitting by herself, Allie went up to her to ask her where her date was. Chelsea didn't know. She hadn't seen him in an hour. Chelsea also explained that they met in rehab, and that she had only gone out with him 4 times. Allie grew concerned with this man being here after hearing this. We asked our parents and some close family to look around for the man, to confirm if he was still there or not. There was some concerning news when one of my relatives said that some of the gifts in the room where the gifts were being stored were missing. We immediately attributed this to Rob and had an employee ask over the microphone for everybody to keep an eye out for Rob. Chelsea wanted to call his cell, but she couldn't find her phone. This put a slight damper on things, but we didn't let it ruin our wedding day. Our parents called the police and dealt with them on the side, with the help of Chelsea giving information about Rob. After the wedding reception, a few close friends came back to our hotel room for a little after-party of sorts. Chelsea had texted Allie asking for our home address, because she had to drop off her gift that she forgot to give. Allie responded, and then our good time was interrupted by a distressing phone call from Chelsea's phone number. Allie turned off the music and put it on speakerphone. There was a male's breathing on the other end, like horror movie shit, like he was trying to creep us out. Allie kept asking where Chelsea was, to no avail. Eventually the person on the other end hung up. Allie called her grandma, who was the only one close enough with Chelsea to know where she would be, and she confirmed that Chelsea was staying with her for the night. Chelsea got on the phone and said she lost her phone at the wedding, and she didn't know her Apple ID or password, therefore she couldn't even track it with Find My iPhone. Our best guess was that it was that Rob guy. We were now concerned that he knew our address and that we weren't home. We were too drunk to go home, so we asked my dad to stay there for the night and watch the house. He gladly did so. And the next morning, we woke up to texts and missed calls from my dad. He said someone kept tapping on different windows to the house, as if to be messing with him. He called the police, but they didn't find anyone. That same day, we went to the police station to see what could be done about pursuing Rob, who we suspected was the one behind all of this. But without video cameras catching the thief in Comber Hall, and given that Chelsea's phone had been turned off or destroyed, there was little to nothing the police could do. Chelsea told us that she and Rob had gotten into a verbal argument, and that he blamed us for whatever she was saying. He thought we didn't like him, and in his words, we sabotaged him. This just further led us to believe he was responsible for that weird phone call and coming to our house in an attempt to scare or harass us. We never saw or heard from that Rob guy again, and we have only started to further distance ourselves from Chelsea after that. I had a pretty low-key beach wedding, mostly just family and friends. My wife, who I'll just call Trisha, invited more people than me for sure. She even invited her ex-boyfriend Kyle. I didn't know exactly how I felt about that at the time, but I acted accepting and fine with it because I knew they remained close friends. There were about 75 people at the wedding ceremony, including Kyle. I didn't pay it much mind the day of the wedding because it was such a big day and my mind was obviously racing. Kyle was friendly to me, but throughout the wedding reception, I noticed Kyle would constantly be talking to Trisha, and when he wasn't talking to her, he'd be looking in her general direction. I mean, Trisha and I were married now. It's not like he had any shot at all. So at the time, I started to think maybe I was just being a little too paranoid, even if it was slightly annoying. Kyle came alone to the wedding though, which I thought was just a tad weird that he didn't bring a date. My wife and I stayed in a fancy waterfront hotel that night, and the next day we went back home. A couple people who didn't make the wedding came by the house to congratulate us and drop off gifts. Surprisingly, Kyle stopped by as well. Trisha and I had recently moved into a new house together, and Kyle claimed to have stopped by to check out our new place and to drop off his gift that he didn't get to give us yesterday. He handed us, well, Trisha specifically, an envelope and a little foot-long teddy bear holding a heart. On the heart was our initials, which I actually found to be a nice, thoughtful gift. We gave Kyle a tour of the house and he stayed for a beer, but after that he said he'd better get going and congratulated us once more before leaving. Inside the envelope was a card containing $100. As nice as I thought the gifts were, I still believed he had some serious feelings for Trisha, and I asked her to ease back on the friendship a bit. She couldn't see what I saw though, apparently. She swore up and down that they were just very close friends and that there were no feelings left on either side. Trisha put the teddy bear next to some of the other gifts on our dressers. While my wife and I were in bed together having a romantic moment, I stopped her when I heard this weird noise. I couldn't put my finger on what it was, but it sounded like a small electrical component. I looked around for my phone and found it was on my nightstand. I chalked it up to being a vibration from a text notification. Like half an hour later, laying in bed with the light off, I once again brought up Kyle, asking if he'd texted her since the day before. She said he has, and I got a little annoyed. I repeated myself, saying I don't want her talking to him anymore. She got a little mad at me for accusing her of being interested in him at all. I assured her he was still interested in her. Why else would he stick around in his ex's life like this? She got back at me with her assurance that she doesn't view him romantically at all, that she's no longer attracted to him, and that she broke up with him for a reason. She followed this with she will ease back on her contact with him. I apologized for coming at her like that, and we went to sleep. The next day, when I got home from work, Trisha exclaimed that Kyle randomly blocked her on Instagram, and when she texted him asking what's wrong, he replied, "What do you care? I heard the things you said." When she tried texting back asking what he was talking about, she saw that he blocked her number now too. I wondered if maybe she butt dialed him on her phone while we had that conversation the previous night. But when she checked her call history, his name wasn't there. I wasn't angry though. Him blocking her meant I was right. He did still have feelings, and now he'd be gone. That night while in bed, we talked about it some more. Then I heard the little electronic vibrating sound again. I looked at the teddy bear on the dresser. Then I got up and went to pick it up, and my heart dropped. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and started to tear the bear open. Trisha realized it immediately too. The inside of the bear's head was a square electrical component wired to what was very obviously a camera behind the left eye and a microphone box wired to the left ear. This was connected to some kind of Bluetooth device that would probably allow a phone to send and receive data. We went to the police that night with the teddy bear and filed a police report. We then hired a lawyer and pressed charges against Kyle for invasion of privacy, and the judge ruled in our favor and required Kyle to pay us $15,000 each. Trisha also got a restraining order against him, and that was the end of him in our lives. Though we still do sometimes worry that he may pay us an unexpected visit. If he was crazy enough to wire a teddy bear to spy on us and possibly watch us in bed together, who knows how far someone like that is capable of going. I live in a safe town, the kind of town that you can leave your car doors unlocked. Hell, you can usually get away with leaving the doors to your house unlocked. The crime rate is very low, and I live on a dead-end block. I had just gotten home from work around 8 p.m. after a 12-hour shift and was preparing a late dinner when the phone rang. The second I picked up, I heard the sound of the person on the other end hanging up. I don't know if this has any correlation with what's to come, but if it does, that's even more horrifying. On nights where I get home late, especially after 12-hour shifts, usually I'll just cook, eat, clean up, take a shower, then lay in bed watching TV for an hour before going to sleep. This was one of those nights. I was physically and mentally exhausted, which led me to making what I learned that night was a serious mistake. I was laying in bed watching The Sopranos for my third run. Sometimes I'll drift off to sleep with the TV still on when I'm just completely beat, and that's exactly what happened this night. I woke up to the TV still playing The Sopranos. I had slept through 2 episodes. I felt around the bed for the remote and turned it off. In the now freshly silent room, I was able to hear little creaks in the wood under the carpet. I felt adrenaline kick in as I looked across the dark room, and I felt I could vaguely see the shape of a very wide figure. As I aimed the remote at the TV to turn it back on to light up the room, before the TV was even on, I started choking on my own spit as I tried to say, "Please leave." The TV came back on, and the room lit up a tint of blue, revealing her. This woman in a wedding dress, looking at me, with the veil covering her face. I tried to scream at first, but nothing came out of my mouth because I was just in pure shock. I sat up, pressed against the headboard of my bed, frozen. That's the best way I can describe what I was doing in that moment. The woman in the dress, whose face I could barely see, walked over to the bed, whispering, "Where is my groom?" over and over, but each time she said it, she got louder. Her whisper quickly turned to a yell, and she grabbed the edge of my mattress and started shaking it. I screamed back at her to leave me alone. Then I got off the bed, pushed her, and ran to the bathroom across the hall and locked the door. She followed me, trying to open the door, banging on it and repeating the words, "Where's my groom?" I yelled at her I'm calling the cops, and luckily I had my cell phone on me. The woman was crying now on the other side of the door, still knocking and banging. The last thing I heard her say was, "I have to get to my wedding." I heard her stomp down my stairs, screaming and crying. Then I heard the front door slam shut. I was on the phone with 911, and I explained what just happened. I checked the living room, and she was gone. I stepped outside to see if I could see which way she ran, but she was out of sight. A police officer showed up shortly, and I described her as some larger woman in a white wedding dress and veil. How she was screaming, "Where's my groom?" and "I have to get to my wedding." I couldn't help with the direction she ran to. It was either down the only direction the street goes, or the woods to the right. Because of my exhaustion after my 12-hour shift, I had forgotten to simply lock my door, something I honestly never even thought was a problem in my neighborhood. But this just goes to show that even the best of neighborhoods, you're not always safe from crazy people out there. I think this woman was off her rocker and belonged in a mental asylum, and I hope police or somebody found her roaming the streets that night and brought her somewhere to get her help. There's a YouTuber by the name of Dan Bell, who's known for exploring abandoned places on his own and getting it on video. The purpose of these videos is not to catch paranormal footage, but simply to explore these places. However, in this specific video of his, a number of unsettling events take place that would make most people run for the exit. This video was shot at an abandoned children's asylum, and you can tell the eerie vibes from the place from just outside. Dan's camera battery inexplicably explodes in his hands, which is only the start of the strange occurrences.
Shit! Fucking battery exploded.
Soon after, without even knowing it, Dan is being stalked by an unknown presence. In this shot, you can see what looks like the shadow of someone's arm making a motion as if they had just told someone to shush. In a follow-up shot in an adjacent room, if you look closely, you can notice something peering in through the doorknob hole to this door. Exactly 1 minute later in the video, what looks like a white figure can be seen peering at the camera as Dan turns. And when his hand moves away, you can see the figure is gone. This white figure might match the white figure that peered through the doorknob hole. And finally, when Dan finds himself in a room with blood on the floor, you can hear a voice in the next room over, saying what most closely resembles "Let's get him."
Oh my god, I'm gonna fucking freak out.
Dan had a theory of his own as to what was following him around in there.
I think that a former patient has returned to this facility, to this house, and is living here in one of the rooms upstairs.
Others believe there may have been more than one person in there, and that they had some kind of white sheets over their heads to hide their identities, planning on robbing him or worse. Powlee's Island is a small town in South Carolina, which by the immediate looks of it is a very peaceful place. But there is a story that many of the locals swear by, known as the Gray Man. Many locals claim they have seen the Gray Man, and some go as far as to say that any time the Gray Man has been spotted, a hurricane has swept through the island shortly after. All sightings of the Gray Man have been on the coast. There are many pictures online which have allegedly caught the Gray Man, but this one video captured by a Coast Guard surveillance camera captures a strange gray apparition moving down the boardwalk, and this was captured during Hurricane Florence. YouTuber by the name of Time to Play TV decided to spend the night at an allegedly haunted hotel in Georgia, the Riverview Hotel.
As you know, this is where we went to. This place that the video you're about to see is a haunted hotel. It was made in like 1916 by 3 women who had it built, and then they ran it, and they obviously eventually have passed away. And then I guess the sightings started happening after they started passing away. People would see a woman in the hallway. Stuff would move, stuff would happen, and people would say, "Hey, that's the girl I saw. The pictures on the wall is the woman I saw."
His plan was to set up a camcorder in the room while he slept and try to capture any paranormal footage. Unbeknownst to him until after his visit, a visitor had recently died in that exact room he stayed in. Before even setting up his camcorder, strange things already started to occur, like the fan turning on and off and the bathroom door shutting on its own.
My fan has shut off and turned back on. See that? Now the fan and the light are both plugged in behind the bed, and they're connected. So that shuts them both off. You hear the fan shut off? And the fan by itself is turned off, I want to say, maybe 2 or 3 times. The bathroom door over there, it's closed. Now, I don't mean a little bit. I mean, it's fully closed. Now, the reason it's open now is because I thought maybe a breeze, maybe something. There's no windows open. I got nothing going on, and that thing right there is just closed all by itself. It's closing right now, guys. It just moved a little bit. I'm telling you, it just... See that? There's no one in here with me. Completely alone. No? There's no one here, guys. I'm using the front facing the camera, so it's kind of hard to see. But you can see. Watch. Watch. See, it's a watch. It doesn't close by itself.
Then night came, and upon checking the footage the next morning, he could see things were just as strange overnight. Not only the chair, but also the entire bed moves, he decides he's not going back to sleep. Whether this was an elaborate hoax or truly a haunted hotel room is up to you to decide. It's the story everyone's heard 100 times already. A house nestled in the Long Island town of Amityville, which will forever be linked to what is known as the Amityville horror phenomenon. On November 13th, 1974, the estate was the scene of a mass murder. Ronald J. DeFeo Jr., who was 23 at the time, shot and killed with a rifle his entire family while they were asleep, which included his parents and 4 siblings. 13 months later, the Lutz family purchased the 5-bedroom, 3.5-bathroom home at a drastically reduced price of $80,000. But they only lasted 28 days before leaving it due to strange phenomenon, including George Lutz, the father, waking up at 3 a.m. every morning, which was around the time Ron DeFeo carried out his murders, and the youngest daughter, Missy, beginning to speak to an imaginary young entity in the house. A camera investigation was conducted of the house, and out of all the pictures taken, one stood out the most. The boy in this picture is commonly thought to represent the youngest DeFeo family member, who was murdered in the house and also the entity that Missy had been communicating with. This is another video uploaded by a YouTuber who decided to venture out alone to an allegedly haunted abandoned building. This time a house in a rural part of Japan, seemingly in the middle of the woods. While scoping the perimeter of the house, the cameraman is suddenly startled by this.
音がやばい。何何何？何？手じゃない今。ねえ、ちょっと待って、手打つなかった今。ねえ。
A hand can be seen grabbing the corner of the house, causing the man to flee. Even after this, though, apparently the cameraman is still determined enough to enter the house to continue with the investigation, against anyone's better judgment.
何なんか聞こえる。うわ、ちょっと待って。なんか聞こえるんだけど。何？嘘。うわ、聞こえた。うわ、聞こえちゃった。どうしよう。うわ、ちょっと待って。
Shortly after entering the basement, this is what the camera catches.
裏側。ねえ。いや、マジでやばい。なんかいる。絶対いる。何？
The cameraman was clearly being stalked by someone in this house. By who remains a mystery. Some reactions to the video even suggest that it may have been the ghost of someone who formerly lived there. A Redditor by the name of Jessica shared footage she recorded in the Airbnb she was renting. There wasn't supposed to be anybody else in the rental, and she didn't even meet the owners as the keys were left in the mailbox. Shortly into her stay, she was getting ready to take a shower when she started hearing sounds from inside the walls. She rushed to get her camera and get the sounds on video. This is what she captured. As you can see, after finding a sealed ventilation duct and pulling the seal off of it, the terrifying voices of people speaking Latin became much clearer and sound as though they were speaking the Trinitarian formula and other religious phrases. Strangely, the voices apparently fell silent abruptly, but that wasn't where the nightmarish experience ended for Jessica. That night, with the bathroom door open and the bathroom light on, a picture was taken of her as she was sleeping, and the person who took the picture was holding a note in front of the camera that said it's rude to eavesdrop. This was the security footage recorded one rainy night in Huacho, Brazil. In the recording, a confused-looking woman is seen walking through the street in the rain, and at first this seems relatively normal, nothing too unusual, until the woman seems to slowly disappear as she gets closer to the bottom of the screen, until she vanishes altogether. When zoomed in, you can also see the woman seems scantily dressed for the weather conditions seen in the video. Sure, someone can say it's just a smudge on the screen or perhaps some other digital problem. However, moments later, a motorcycle passes by in the same region in which the woman seemed to vanish, yet it's completely visible, And then the same could be said with the truck as it makes its turn, completely visible. It also appears that the driver of the truck may have been reacting to what he also just witnessed to be a vanishing woman. Whether this was just camera trickery or really a wandering apparition is up to the viewer to decide. This video was captured in Costa Rica on someone's home security camera. At an off hour in the night, out from the woods comes a bizarre, horrifying looking creature. At first, one might assume it's just a person doing some kind of crab walk, or if this were Australia, they would just assume it's another spider. But you don't even have to watch too closely to ask why or how the arms and legs would be the same length if this were a person. If it was just a person contorting his or her body, the creature wouldn't appear as long as it does and would most likely have a noticeable lump in its back from them contorting their torso. Also, based on the dog's reactions, this was not the work of CGI, as they were reacting to something that's actually there and cause for alarm. This fourth video was taken from the Japanese YouTube channel Omogatoki Films. Their channel focuses on exploring haunted locations and capturing paranormal events on video. In January of this year, the owners of the channel were contacted by a real estate agent regarding a house he's been having trouble selling, due to the fact that the house used to be owned by a family that mysteriously disappeared in 2013.
僕が前勤めていた不動産屋さんの元先輩、何やら僕らに対してちょっと一度見てほしい物件。
その古い戸建てを会社で買ったんだけど、急に飛び込みできた人で、いくらで売りたいか聞くじゃん。で、そしたらもう本当破格の
売り主さんが持っていたその土地の上に3人の家族が家を建てて住み始めたらしいんですよね。ただ今から6、7年ぐらい前にある日を境にその3人
All of the previous owner's belongings were left in the house, adding to the mystery. The real estate agent refuses to even enter the house, as he believes there's a dark entity in the house, and he hopes that they would be able to search the house and find any kind of explanation, as this is what they do for a living. The agent mentions to them to make sure to keep all the doors shut while investigating the house, but doesn't mention why. As the two are exploring this closet, they notice something after reviewing the footage. See if you can find it.
ほらもう全部開いてるもん。
ああ、確かに確かに。すっごい、ほんと物がやばい。
If you didn't see it, behind a clothes rack, you can see two bare feet underneath. This isn't the last time they can be seen. As they search a nearby room, the feet can be seen again, this time much closer and visibly barefoot. Later on in the night, one of the two decide to place a camera in the dark and sit in one room, waiting for something to happen. After about 15 minutes, he decided to investigate other rooms, while still remembering to shut all the doors behind him. As you just saw, there was a face looking in through the door, but as he approaches, it disappears. There's no one outside the door. It could be speculated that the house is haunted by the family that mysteriously disappeared almost a decade ago. This was some alleged sighting of La Llorona. La Llorona is known as a ghost who roams waterfront areas mourning her drowned children. This video was captured in León, Guanajuato, Mexico. The video is of a man running from what resembles La Llorona. In the video, if you slow it down and zoom in, the figure in the distance resembles a woman in a white dress crying and yelling. The man was coming home from a party around 3 o'clock in the morning when he encountered the woman in front of him. As he starts to run in fear, the woman starts shouting at him, not making any sense of what she's saying. The man allegedly died 3 days after the sighting, and the cause of death was ruled a heart attack. This video was recorded in November of 2020, and it's just recently getting noticed. This was the footage captured by Russian YouTuber Dark Ghost. He posts high-quality ghost hunting videos, and this one might be one of his scariest. A woman had written to him about her deceased son who was obsessed with the paranormal and finding out what happens to the human soul after death and the afterlife. One day he told his mother that he discovered a way to contact deceased relatives, and he traveled to the abandoned village where his late grandmother lived. A week later, the mother received a call from the son, saying he was hearing the voices of his grandparents among other entities. This call was the last that was heard of the son, and his body was found on the streets of the village. The cause of death was ruled to be acute heart failure. The mother asked Dark Ghost to visit the grandparents' old house where the son would often visit, and this was some of the footage he captured. Various sounds such as footsteps and knocks can be heard throughout the video, and on multiple occasions, doors and cabinets can be seen swinging open or closed on their own. If you didn't see it, a black shadow can be seen floating across the screen clear as day.
Либо шкаф, все грохочет, я не понимаю, либо комод. Опа.
Next, he enters a creepy red room populated with disturbing pictures that the woman's son would collect and bring to the house.
Бля. Вроде бы как. У меня вообще всего тут такого, как бы, фотографий таких. Пипец. Это просто жесть.
This is definitely one of those houses that an explorer should not go to alone. Based on the events in this video, there may have been someone or something in the house with him, watching him the entire time. Could it be the spirit of the woman's son? Or perhaps a much more hostile entity? Or could it all just be trickery? As usual, that's up for you to decide. In 1991, a 12-year-old boy named Jared Negretti went hiking on a camping trip with his Boy Scout troop that consisted of 14 other boys. They were hiking towards the summit of Mount San Gorgonio in the San Bernardino National Forest in Southern California. Jared was on the shorter and heavier side. Around 6 p.m., 1,000 feet away from the summit, another group of hikers spotted Jared straggling behind and notified the scoutmaster at the summit. They said he was seen shortcutting the switchbacks on his way down the trail and was told not to and to stay on the trail by the other hikers. The scoutmaster, who was an experienced hiker, said he would pick up Jared on the way down. When he finally was able to descend the mountain to pick up Jared, he was nowhere to be seen. As soon as the scoutmaster realized that Jared had disappeared, he took the other scouts in his troop back to base camp and then hiked about 5 miles in the dark to get help. Sheriff's deputies, along with search and rescue teams, began searching a 130 square mile area of the San Gorgonio wilderness, a very rocky, tree-lined terrain. Within 3 days, their search was focused on a 6 square mile area where a footprint believed to match one of Jared's high-top tennis shoes was found. Searchers also discovered beef jerky and candy wrappers believed to have been dropped by Jared, and perhaps most importantly, his camera was found. On the film roll were 12 pictures. Most were landscapes taken by the boy when he was still with the troop, but the last one shows a self-portrait in which it seems he pointed the camera at his face, aided with the flash of the camera. It's possible he lost the camera when he slid down a portion of the mountainside. At least 70 officers, including some airlifted by helicopter and some on horseback, were deployed. Some of the helicopters were even equipped with infrared scanning. Over the next 2 weeks, as many as 3,000 people had logged 45,000 hours searching 50 square miles of the San Bernardino National Forest. So the question is, did he fall off the trail and slip down the mountainslide? While it's possible, it seems unlikely that his body wouldn't have been found in the immediate area around the switchbacks he was cutting down. Some people think he may have been the victim of a bear attack, but this seems unlikely as well, as there were no signs of blood, drag marks, or other evidence linked to any animal attack. Some believe he was abducted by a predator, given the mountain is well used by hikers. To this day, 3 decades later, Jared's remains have never been found. On the cold night of February 24th, 1978, 5 young men from Yuba County, California, Bill Sterling, Jack Hutes, Ted Weir, Jack Madruga, and Gary Mathias, headed to California State University to attend a basketball game. When the group of men didn't return the next day, friends and family grew concerned. What should have been a quick road trip to see a basketball game turned into a mystery that has never been solved. All 5 men suffered their own mild forms of mental issues, but they were still able to fully function in society. The men were scheduled to play in a Special Olympics basketball game of their own the next day, for which they prepared their clothes before leaving for California State University the day prior. A police search ensued shortly after they were reported missing, and a few days later, the men's car was found abandoned far from the route they should have taken to return to Yuba City. In fact, it was a whole hour in the wrong direction of Yuba City, having been driven up a winding mountain pass in the Plumas National Forest at the northern point of the Sierra Nevada. The car had a few empty food wrappers and drink bottles. Apart from that, the car was empty. The car was found in working condition. It was lodged in a snowbank with no signs of foul play. However, the car could have been easily pushed out by the 5 young men, raising more questions. For the next week or so, police and forest rangers searched the area hoping for any signs of them, but unfortunately any possible tracks of the men, or even God forbid their bodies, were covered by a passing snowstorm. Multiple sightings of the 5 young men were reported, but none led to their discovery. First, a man named Joseph Scones called police, saying he saw the group of men on the Friday they disappeared, while he was trying to push his stuck car out of the snow. Joseph suffered a mild heart attack while trying to push his car out, and when he saw flashlight beams outside his car and a small group of men, he tried to call and ask the men for help, but they suddenly disappeared as if they ignored him. A second witness said she saw 5 men in a red pickup truck on Saturday and Sunday, an hour from where the car was abandoned, She told police that 2 of the men came into her store to buy food and used the phone while the rest stayed in the truck. Their disappearances continued to baffle everybody, even more so when the snow melted months later, in June of that same year, because more questions arose. A local man noticed a broken window in a Forest Service trailer, and when police inspected it, they found the dead body of Ted Weir inside. He appeared to have died from starvation, despite having food readily available nearby in the trailer. He was wrapped in many layers of blankets, and his feet were badly frostbitten. But what makes no sense is the fireplace, which could have been easily set up and could have kept him warm, was completely untouched, and on top of that, warm snow clothes that were found in the trailer were unused by Ted. It's possible he lived up to 13 weeks after the initial disappearance. 20 miles away from where the car had been abandoned, the bones of Bill Sterling, Jack Hutes, and Jack Madruga were found not far from Ted's emaciated body, spread out from each other. They had died of hypothermia. Strangely, Gary was never found. Only his shoes were discovered in the nearby woods. To this day, no one can figure out why the group had gone in the direction they did, or why they left their perfectly functioning car, which the 5 men could have easily pushed out from the snow, only to separate from each other and eventually starve or freeze to death. On top of this, all of their families agreed that it was uncharacteristic of them to not help John Scones push his car out from the snow when he called out for help, and why Ted didn't even attempt to start a fire or the trailer's heating system, or eat the food found in the trailer, still makes no sense at all. Craig Freer of Scotia, New York, was 17 when he was last seen in June of 2004. He was a popular kid, with dimples, red hair, and a welcoming smile as he was described by friends and family. He was a star soccer player at the Scotia Glenville High School and about to be named captain of his team. Craig also picked up a part-time job, and his future was looking bright. There were a few colleges interested in offering Craig a scholarship for his athletic abilities, and one could say the world was truly his oyster. But that all changed on June 27, 2004. On that day, he walked into the woods and was never seen again. So rewinding a bit, when Craig picked up his job at the Price Chopper supermarket in Glenville, New York, his parents were proud that he'd be fitting working in with his busy schedule. On the dreaded day of Craig's disappearance, he was seen by his parents walking out of his home for what would be the last time. His parents were under the impression he was going to work. His mother, Veronica, had even seen him carrying his uniform with him to his car. But when she went to go shopping at the supermarket later where Craig worked, just a few hours after he left home for his shift, she was confused when there was no trace of him. Veronica learned that Craig had actually lost his job at the supermarket after 2 months of employment and had been hiding it from his parents. He had been pretending to work there for weeks after his termination so that his parents wouldn't know he was no longer employed. It's unknown why he was fired though, likely for not showing up. Very upset with their son, Craig's parents called his girlfriend since he left his phone behind. They did not yet know that she was his ex-girlfriend. They called her to see if they knew where he was, and at first she said she had no idea, but after a second call, out of guilt, she admitted that he was with her. Veronica lectured Craig over the phone, telling him that he needed to come home right away and that they needed to talk to him. Little did they know he was visiting her because he was upset about their recent breakup. Craig said goodbye to his ex-girlfriend and left her apartment located in Scotia as well, and according to his ex-girlfriend, she watched as he walked towards his car, but then stood still for a moment, then darted off in the opposite direction, as if something had scared him and he was running away from imminent danger. However, if that were the case, it would have made more sense to drive away. Before this, he told his mother he would be home in 10 minutes over the phone, the time it would take to drive from his ex-girlfriend's to home. Around the time that call ended, Craig's dad arrived at the complex and saw his son's car was still parked outside. By 5 p.m. that day, Veronica had reported her son missing, and at first police weren't too interested, assuming it was just a normal kid running away for the day because of an argument with parents. But as hours turned into days, and when the investigators found out that he didn't have his phone or wallet with him at the time of his disappearance, they agreed something was wrong and began to further investigate. Police hit a big lead when a few teenagers came forward to tell police that they had seen Craig or someone matching his description walking along the railroad tracks behind his ex-girlfriend's apartment complex, and shortly after, he was seen entering the woods. They claimed that when they tried to call to him, he motioned for them to be quiet with his finger to his lips, and then just kept on walking, disappearing into the woods. Investigators started searching up and down the railway line with no luck. Police dogs were used while searching the woods, even checking the nearby Mohawk River, but all these searches turned up nothing, as if Craig had just vanished into thin air. Of course, after 2 decades, police investigations have largely scaled back, but in 2021, a new lead was discovered. One of Craig's co-workers at the Price Chopper supermarket told investigators that sometime between June 27th and June 2nd, 2004, he saw Craig in the passenger seat of a car traveling north on Route 50 in Glenville. According to the witness, the car stopped at the traffic lights on Sheffield Road before turning left and disappearing up the intersecting road. Craig's family is still hoping that one day they'll learn the truth about what happened to their son. For a well-liked 17-year-old with such a bright future, no one can seem to understand how or why he just vanished into the woods. And lastly, here's one many of you may have heard before, but still remains one of the creepiest national park disappearances I've ever heard. In March of 2014, 2 Dutch young women, Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, went to Panama for a vacation to reward themselves for graduating. To make it a little more upsetting, the two had taken on extra shifts the month prior in order to pay for it. Reaching Panama, they soon headed for the town of Bouquet, where they were hosted by a family. Shortly after, on April 1st, 2014, Chris and Lisanne vanished as they were hiking the trails in the forest around the town of Bouquet, which in of itself was strange because they were scheduled for a tour guide by the name of Feliciano to assist them on the trails for the following day. The 2 women made their way for the trails, accompanied by the host family's dog named Blue. When Blue arrived back home later that evening without the girls, the family became concerned and tried contacting the mother of Lisanne, who then proceeded to try to make contact with her daughter, but to no avail. On April 2nd, the following day, Feliciano was waiting for the girls to show up for their hike, but they never arrived.
La persona que por un evento que teníamos pendiente de hacer el día miércoles a las 8 de la mañana les fui a buscar, no las encontré y ya al darnos cuenta que no habían dormido en su casa donde habitualmente estaban con la familia, al día siguiente.
He went to the home of the host family the girls were staying at, but they weren't there as well. In fact, most of the women's belongings were still there prior to their disappearances. The women did have their cell phones, but they wouldn't answer any attempted calls. As panic began to set in with everyone, the police were contacted and an extensive search began, with the help of everyone from farmers and locals to detectives, search dogs, helicopters, and more. The search lasted for 10 days, yet no trace of Chris and Lisanne were found. 2 months had passed and a local found a backpack belonging to one of the women. To everyone's shock and horror, skeletal remains were also discovered, and after DNA testing, they were shown to be matches for both women. The story doesn't end there though. While continuing the investigation, their cell phone logs were released. The 2 women were trying to make 911 phone calls throughout the stretch of the 10 days, but they couldn't get service. Although believed to be a possible accident of getting lost and injured in the forest, which therefore resulted in succumbing to the elements, strange discoveries were made that brought that theory into question. Inside one of the backpacks, there was a camera with 100 photos stored on the memory, taken within those 10 days of their vanishing. Most of these photos were normal, scenic pictures documenting what was supposed to be the 2 young women's fun vacation. The police were also able to take the pictures that the women took and match them up with their phone calls to 911. Disturbingly, cell phone data shows that only 2 hours after this seemingly happy photo was taken, they attempted to call 911. It starts to become stranger though. 10 out of the 100 pictures were taken within the 10 days. The other 90 were taken afterwards around 1 to 4 in the morning, in complete darkness. It may be that they were taken to get some form of vision at night through the flash, but it's not been confirmed. Some believe that it wasn't even the girls that took these pictures. In one photo of a close-up of the back of Chris's head, it seems to show a wound to the right side in the temple area and blood on her hair. Lisanne may have been using the camera light to see how bad Chris's injury was. Some people believe Chris was actually deceased in this photo, and that their murderer was the one taking the photo. Disturbingly, there was a hiking shoe that still had a foot in it that belonged to Chris. Also found was a pelvic bone that belonged to Lisanne. As of right now, the accepted theory by police is that the 2 women went off the beaten path of the trail, and one of them was injured. Then the other woman was trying to provide help and became injured herself in the process, which then led to starvation and dehydration. But this is just a theory, and whether this is true, or if the 2 girls were targeted by someone out in the woods, will potentially forever remain unknown. But wait, what if the tour guide had something to do with it? A lot of people believe Feliciano had something to do with their deaths. In fact, multiple women have left reviews on the tour guide, warning women not to go into the woods alone with him, as he can become very touchy-flirty, even allegedly joking with one girl that he'd chop her leg off. On top of this, Feliciano was the one to find the shoe with a foot in it behind a specific tree trunk, almost as if he knew to look there. There are a lot more details that go into this theory, but that would remain a video for a different day. For now, whether the tour guide had any part in their disappearance may forever remain a mystery, just like the rest of this case. My dad served in the Vietnam War from 1960 to 1962. For the longest time, he didn't tell anyone outside of the family this story, but he's in his mid-80s now, and he doesn't care about me sharing it with anyone. Not that I intend to release any of our names. I've heard this story told by him 5 times now, and each time I learn about new details he hadn't mentioned the time before. He didn't like to tell this story for obvious reasons, I think. Not only is thinking back to any of those events probably traumatizing, but also he would always say he felt it would be an inappropriate family gathering discussion. My dad did a lot of things in the war. At one point he was what was known as a tunnel rat, which was a soldier who performed underground search and destroy missions, usually in underground tunnels. My dad and 2 of his comrades were crawling through a deep tunnel expecting to hit a booby trap or run into an ambush, but the tunnels were surprisingly empty and silent. My dad describes the experience of crawling through the silent, dark tunnels as bone-chilling and adrenaline-pumping, as the fear of instant death at any moment would linger. My dad and his comrades heard a faint yelling and crying sound further down the tunnels. It was of a woman. As they crawled deeper into the tunnels, the cries and screams became more clear. And it was obvious there was a woman screaming for help. The 3 picked up their pace, worried of a potential hostage or a prisoner situation. As they continued to crawl through the tunnels, the cries for help got a little louder and clearer. They arrived to a small room that they could slightly get off their knees in. The ceiling was just high enough to half stand, half crouch. There was a small table with a lantern on it that was still lit. There were also 2 broken chairs and a locked safe box with some metallic objects that would rustle around inside the box when shaken. Aside from that, this small room was empty. However, the tunnel continued past this room. So they continued deeper into the tunnel, but the screams for help had stopped at this point. My dad described this horrible, familiar stench of death that soon became overwhelming in the tunnels. They entered one final room with no further tunnels. My dad still refuses to describe everything that was in this room in detail, other than there were multiple bodies, and they weren't killed by just bullets. They looked as though they'd been mutilated by some kind of creature. One of the bodies was that of a woman. The scene was so horrible that my dad and the 2 other tunnel rats had to turn around and flee. They had no explanation for what could have done what was seen in that room. On their crawl back out of the tunnels, they started hearing the cries for help from that woman's voice again. My dad says he and his comrades froze and looked at each other with wide eyes and obvious fear in their faces. They had made it to the end of that tunnel. There were no living things from there to the end of it, yet those screams for help were coming from the direction that they just were. They picked up their pace even more. My dad was in the back of the group of 3, and he says he would look back every 10 seconds, thinking he was hearing sounds from behind him, fearing he would see someone or something approaching from the darkness. They made it back to the surface eventually, and marked the entrance with a flag that signified to his team that the tunnel had been searched and cleared. Most tunnels would be interconnecting as a means of underground transportation and cover, but my dad says this tunnel was unusual to abruptly end. He says it was easily the most gut-wrenching, horrific, nightmare-inducing thing he'd experienced in his entire 2 years in Vietnam. My basic training for the Air Force was at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. After that, I was sent to Shepherd Air Force Base for technical school, and after my graduation, I received orders to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. There, my job was aerospace mechanic at first. I started on the night duty, unfortunately, so my sleep schedule was basically non-existent. My duties basically were lugging plane parts like anti-ice valves, igniters, ignition exciters, sensors, and more from the warehouse to the flight line. It was for the most part boring, repetitive work, especially at night. A lot of sitting around and playing games on my phone, but nobody heard that from me. It had to be like 4 a.m. at this point. I was waiting for the other guy to come drop off some parts to the flight line. He'll be referred to as Mark for the purpose of this story. I was waiting by the back cargo area of the plane we were working on at the time, sitting on a box scrolling through my phone. Mark was taking an incredibly long time with his delivery, so I shot him a few texts. When they went unresponded to, I tried calling him a few times. The calls rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. I figured he was either screening his calls, lost his phone, or was just very busy at the moment. I waited and waited, and he never showed up. Eventually I got a call from Mark's number, so I picked up, but it wasn't Mark's voice on the other end. It was some random guy. He sounded like a grown man in his 40s. He said he saw I tried calling a few times and said he found this phone on the ground outside of the base. I described what Mark looked like and asked him if he had seen anyone who may have resembled him. He said he had not. It's not like he would have been allowed on the base, so my only option was to drive out there and meet him. I asked him where he was, and he gave me the name of a nearby joint where I agreed to meet him. I walked to my car, which was parked in the closest parking lot, and I drove off the base towards the place he told me to meet him. While I was mid-drive, I remembered Mark was sharing his location with me. Long story, but we basically met these 2 girls this one night while off base who we separated from each other with. We, as a joke, started sharing our locations with each other in case we got quote-unquote murdered, as we kept joking. We joked about it mainly because we met them at a sketchy dive bar, but I'm not about to get into that. The place the man on the phone told me to meet him was called Tara's Tavern in Cookstown, the closest town to the base. I pulled up the location of Mark's phone and it checked out. It showed Mark's phone location right next to Tara's Tavern. This begged the question, what was that man doing there this late? At this hour the place wasn't open, and there were 0 cars on the road. I pulled into the little parking lot and parked. I stepped out and called Mark's phone again. The guy picked up, and he spoke in a noticeably lower voice now. I told him I was in the parking lot of the pub, and he said he was as well. He said in almost a whisper, "I'll be right over." Then he hung up. It was weirder in the moment than it sounds explaining it. I looked at the location on my phone to see if it was updating, but it seemed the location of Mark's phone was in this small patch of woods about 200 feet long and 200 feet wide. I tried calling again and it went straight to voicemail. I looked around the whole parking lot but didn't see anyone. I was all alone. Not even an occasional passing car. I looked to the woods when I heard something over the sound of the crickets, like someone's footsteps. And then I saw a man. It was him. He was standing just behind the tree line between the woods and the parking lot. He called to me, "Are you alone?" And the sight of him, only his upper body visible, it was freaky as hell. I called back, "No, why?" as I inched my way closer to my car. This was one giant red flag. He called back, "Who are you with?" I didn't answer that. I got in my car and drove back to base. I called my supervisor and told him Mark was missing and someone was hiding in a patch of woods with his phone. My supervisor told me he was with Mark at that moment. He told me to meet them at the small building by the flight line. I met with the 2 and told them once again what I witnessed when tracking his phone. Mark told me what happened. While off the base, he was approached by somebody outside of a 24/7 convenience store asking for a ride back to the base. Mark believed that he was actually in the Air Force at first and let him in the car. But as they were driving, the man asked Mark to pull over by the woods so he could pee real quick. Mark obliged for some reason. As Mark was pulled to the side of the road by the same small patch of woods by Tara's Tavern, he wasn't paying attention for a minute, and his door was opened by the man. Without a second to even react, the man was grabbing Mark's arms and squeezing them as he tried to pull him out of the car. Mark said he kicked at the man's groin area until he let go. He dropped his phone and it fell out of the car during the struggle, but as he was free, he drove the car away with the door still open at first. And next thing that happened was he went back to the base to talk with our supervisor. We of course called the police and all went to Tara's Tavern to check if the man was still there. The location of Mark's phone was no longer popping up on the map. It's possible the man destroyed the phone. All we did was file a police report. Some people out there are actually crazy and dangerous. Who knows what he would have done to either of us if he had gotten us in the woods. During my days as a Marine, I had many different jobs on site, but my least favorite was graveyard patrol. At one point, I was one of the few with the overnight graveyard patrol shift for a nearby memorial cemetery. As you would imagine, it was a pretty slow shift with not much going on. Oddly enough, even though the cemetery was in a remote location surrounded by dense forest on each side, and I was working the literal graveyard shift, I found the job more relaxing than scary or unnerving. I would be the only one in the cemetery, and my relief would come around 4 a.m., which would be the end of my shift. So this had to have happened past 3 a.m., nearing the end of my shift. It was on this otherwise regular night that I was patrolling near the perimeter fence where some of the older headstones were. I wasn't allowed to be on my phone. If I were to be caught with my phone, I would be reprimanded. Even though it was unlikely to be caught since there was no one else really around except for me, I tried my best to follow that rule. So it was just a lot of walking around and looking at old headstones. But anyway, while patrolling past some of the older ones, I began to hear a woman's humming. It was this very calming, soothing kind of humming, only I wasn't calmed or soothed, because nobody was supposed to be in the cemetery, so it was more so a cause for concern. I started following the sounds of the humming. It was coming from behind this intentionally planted line of thick trees with vines and brushes sprouting from the sides of them. Instead of walking around the long wall of trees, I squeezed through the vines and bushes to the other side, cutting myself in the process. As I struggled to make it to the other side, the humming suddenly stopped as quickly as it started. I was left alone to the silence once again, not even the sound of a cricket. I walked closer to the edge of the memorial property, by the woods, near a few of the big mausoleum-looking structures, and I could distinctly hear some kind of buzzing sound coming from one of them. I stepped up the 3 white steps into the structure. The little door didn't have any kind of locks on it. I'd never been in any of these structures until this point, and I was incorrect in my assumption that they were mausoleums. I still don't know what the purpose of them were, maybe some kind of memorial building for deceased veterans in the cemetery. As I was inside that cold, dark structure, I could actually feel the hairs on my arms begin to stand up as I got goosebumps for reasons I wasn't sure of just yet. That buzzing sound was coming from inside of the structure, but it almost seemed like it was coming from beneath my feet. I looked down to the wood floor, and there were tiny round holes in each plank of wood, it seemed. Big enough to look through, but way too dark down there to see what lay below the floorboards. I had an idea. I positioned my phone on the floorboard just right so that the flashlight would shoot light into the hole in the wood, and I would look through one of the other holes. I lay basically flat on the floor with my head pressed up to the wood, one eye closed. I expected to see nothing at all, but I saw what appeared to be the top of a woman's head. And as if she knew I started looking immediately, she looked up at me through the hole. I only saw her face for maybe half a second before I fell backwards and let out a blood-curdling scream. I sprinted back to the parking lot and called the guy who was supposed to relieve me soon, and I told him to meet me now. When he showed up, I tried to convince him that I was telling the truth about what I'd seen in that little building. He entertained me by coming with me to it, and I repeated what I did earlier with my phone flashlight. He looked through multiple holes but saw nothing. I had to check for myself, and he was right. It was just some small, empty-looking space underneath the structure. I spent the rest of the shift with him. I left at 4 on the dot. I know he didn't believe me. I wouldn't have believed me either. I'm sure it's a possibility that it was a hallucination as a result of my lack of sleep. But I also believe it's a possibility that I witnessed a spirit or something completely supernatural. I'd heard so many older Marines and veterans tell of supernatural experiences they had while serving. I don't know who the woman that I saw could have been if it truly wasn't my imagination, but it chills me to the bone to imagine it having been one of the women buried in the cemetery. I've had 3 girlfriends in my life. My current girlfriend, who I've been with for 3 years happily, my first girlfriend in college, and my second girlfriend, Kelly. Kelly was someone who put me through hell emotionally and sometimes physically. I'll start from the beginning. Kelly and I matched on Bumble. and upon seeing that we both attended the same college, we based our conversation off that and any people that we may have mutually known. After seeing each other for about a month, we made it official, and we dated for about 6 months. Like most relationships, at first everything seemed great, and we got along fine. But the illusion of being a happy couple faded after a few months, when Kelly would start becoming very controlling and downright obsessive over knowing what I was doing at all times. The longer we dated, the more I realized she didn't have many friends at all, maybe 1 or 2, that's about it. So when I would go out to see my friends on the weekends without her, she would always obsessively text me every 15 minutes asking me for proof of where I was. If I were ever to be at a bar without her, she'd throw a fit. She'd make me share my location with her after 4 or 5 months of dating. It got to the point I couldn't handle it anymore. She had too much time on her hands to worry about what I was doing constantly. I couldn't even go see my friends without constantly being attacked and interrogated by her. But one night, things escalated far worse than they ever had. Admittedly, I ended up at a bar and very drunk with a group of my drinking buddies. We started at my friend Kevin's house, and I didn't intend on ending up at a bar. When I got home, Kelly was waiting in front of my mom's house for me, with a batshit crazy look on her face. This was one of the first nights that she laid hands on me, repeatedly hitting me while screaming I'm a dirty cheater and other insane things, all while outside causing a scene for the neighbors to hear. After I had to grab her arms to get her to stop, she shouted things like, "Get off me, I'm calling the police." So I let go and told her we're done. This was officially when I broke up with her, and her response was not good. Every single day, I received paragraphs upon paragraphs, ranging from angry to alleged regretfulness back to angry. Eventually, I felt more comfortable blocking Kelly for a while, but that wasn't the end. One of my friends who followed her on Instagram still sent me a screenshot of the picture she posted with this big, ugly, muscular guy who looked like he wanted to kill the person taking the picture. I made a joke to my friends saying, "Wow, I see she upgraded." Kelly did the unimaginable though. I was all cozy in my bed, in the perceived safety of the house. I was home alone, as I usually was living in my parents' house. That was when I heard a pounding at the front door downstairs. I jumped out of bed and went out to the living room to listen. There was a man's screams from the other side. He was screaming, "Open up, pussy." I didn't acknowledge him. I didn't want him to know I was home. Then some random number was calling my phone. When I didn't pick up, I got a text from someone threatening to kill me and telling me to open the door before he breaks the window. I ignored these and called 911. I heard glass breaking from outside. I looked out my window and I saw a familiar, huge bearded guy right by my SUV. He was smashing my windows. I recognized the guy to be from Kelly's picture. As I was on the phone with 911, I explained that my crazy ex-girlfriend sent her current boyfriend to my house to threaten me, and he was currently damaging my vehicle. I answered a bunch of questions as police were en route. All the while the man kept screaming things from outside and pounding on my door and sending threatening texts. Police showed up surprisingly quickly to my relief, and they caught the guy still in front of my house. They saw him step off the front stoop after he saw the cop car pulling up. I went outside right away and showed the police my car and the texts, and the big, roid-raging man was still yelling at me that I'm gonna fucking pay for talking shit about him to Kelly. I told him I hadn't spoken to Kelly in months, and he said, "Oh yeah, what about the texts?" as he was in handcuffs already. I said, "What texts?" and he accused me of being a bullshitter. So after he was brought away in one of 2 police cars, I gave the second police officer whatever information he needed of the situation between Kelly and I, and he told me I had a good case for harassment and should definitely file for a restraining order immediately. He told me to head to the precinct the next day, which is what I did, but I also unblocked Kelly and asked her what she said to her boyfriend and why. And after she responded claiming she had no idea what I was talking about, I sent her a long text giving her a piece of my mind, basically telling her about my getting a restraining order and telling her to seek help. I never heard from her again, nor her crazy, roid-raging, now ex-boyfriend. According to my friend, she deleted the picture with him literally the next day after that happened. I currently have a restraining order against both her and her ex-boyfriend, Javier Cruz. Be careful who you decide to date. There's a whole lot of crazy out there. I dated my ex Kian for 2 years. It was a toxic, abusive relationship. I endured a lot of physical suffering from it, but I was always too scared to leave it. I live with my single mom on a rougher side of town, the place where I spent my entire childhood. Being a girl walking home alone at night here can be sketchy, which was part of the reason why I stayed with Kian for so long. He is a big guy, and I felt a sense of protection with him when he wasn't making me feel like shit. A big reason I stayed with him though towards the end was because I was scared of how he'd take it if I broke up with him. My mother always hated him though, and she knew he was no good for me. Unfortunately, it took me as long as it did to cut ties with him. I did it over text one day though, because I knew if I did it in person he'd hit me or go crazy. He still didn't take it well. Seconds after I texted him, he tried calling me over and over. I wouldn't pick up because I was scared. So after the third or fourth attempted call, he started typing for a few minutes, and the text I got from him was a long paragraph cursing me out, a lot of it in all caps. I texted him back that we could talk about it on the phone tomorrow when he's cooled off. He of course sent another paragraph, and I didn't read this one right away because I was about to cry, and I didn't want to deal with it at that moment. My mom was working her second job that night and wouldn't be home till around 2 in the morning. I had class the next day, so I went to bed early around 10, but falling asleep was difficult with my mind racing. Eventually though, I did fall asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound from the outside of my room. I looked at the clock and it was around 1 a.m. It wasn't uncommon for me to wake up to my mom getting home late at night after work. I was just surprised because she was home rather early this night. I sat up and saw something sitting on the edge of my bed. I realized it was my cat Nala. I got out of bed and went out into the hall and called my mom's name. All the lights were out. I knew for certain I heard something from out in the living room. I turned on the living room lights, but no one was here. I went to the front door to make sure it was locked, and it was. I checked through the window to the driveway, and my mom's car wasn't here, so I figured maybe I was just hearing things. I went back to my room and shut the door, then crawled back into bed. Nala was still in the same spot on my bed. She hadn't moved. I tried to go back to sleep, and I suddenly heard another sound. I ran out to the living room again, and my mom wasn't here still. I suddenly realized Kian knew where we kept the spare key in the backyard. What if he had just let himself in? I went back to my room and called my mom on my cell phone and told her. I had already texted her earlier about my breakup, so she already knew and was proud of me. She said she'd be home in a little bit, and that I could just be hearing house noises. I laid back down in my bed. Nala was still in the same position. I turned on the lamp and went to go pick her up, but I gasped when I saw her eyes lifelessly open and she wasn't breathing. I picked her up and confirmed it. My cat was dead. I wanted to cry, but I covered my mouth. I suddenly knew that Kian was in the house and that he did this to punish me. I locked my bedroom door and called 911 and whispered into the phone that my crazy ex-boyfriend broke into my house and killed my cat. I was told to wait in the closet in my bedroom until I heard the police arrive. I stayed on the phone with 911 in the closet, waiting. At any time during this, the front door to the house could have opened and closed, and I wouldn't have been able to hear it. Eventually, the 911 operator told me the police were there. Apparently, the door was unlocked because they let themselves in. That meant Kian had probably just left. I went to the living room to find 2 police officers. I was bawling my eyes out over Nala now. The first thing they asked was, "Where is he?" And I said, "I think he left." I showed them my cat and the text from Kian. My mom came home shortly after I called her, and she cried over Nala too. The police were not very helpful at all, saying without any actual evidence that someone broke into the house, they couldn't just go and arrest someone. Nala had no stab marks or anything, so as messed up as it sounds, we couldn't even prove that she was likely murdered by Kian as revenge to me. The next day, my mom had the locks to the house changed. The spare key in the backyard was still there, but Kian easily could have put it back. I blocked Kian's number and all social media outlets. All the evidence pointed to him having done it. My mother and I went through the process of getting an order of protection against him, and the judge issued us a temporary one before our court date. The last time I ever saw Kian was in court, where thankfully the judge determined that the order of protection would remain in place. I still often think about how the first time I went downstairs, Kian was probably somewhere in the living room, hiding and watching me. When I was in junior year of high school, I had my first relationship. His name was Mike. He was a senior at a different high school the next town over. We met through Facebook. He messaged me and we started talking from there. We started hanging out and going to each other's games. I'd go to his football games, he'd come to my softball games. We officially became boyfriend-girlfriend after a few weeks. Since we were in high school though, we didn't go on a lot of traditional dates like dinner or drinks. We were just kids still. Our dates usually consisted of getting burritos, going for drives, or hanging out at his place since my parents were always home and made it awkward in case we wanted to do anything. The best way I could describe Mike, he was a bit of a hothead. He was big for a 17-year-old, that's why he played football, but he didn't hang out with the jocks. He hung out more with the stoner crowd and the regular crowd. At least that's what he told me. I didn't go to the same school as him, so I didn't see who he was with during lunch. I also didn't really meet a lot of his friends. We mostly hung out just the two of us, as opposed to group things. Since he lived kind of far though, and I couldn't drive yet, it did get annoying. And truthfully, I started to develop feelings for this boy Andrew at my own school in my grade. Around the same time I felt myself losing interest in Mike. I wanted to test things out with Andrew, so one night when Mike was asking to hang out, I asked him to pick me up so we could talk. He knew right away something was off when I said that. When he picked me up, we went for a drive, and I told him that I think we should take a break. He refused to accept that I was serious, and angrily demanded to know what he did. When I told him it's just that I felt the spark wasn't there anymore, he got so mad that he punched his dashboard, leaving a big indent in it. He started yelling and scaring me, so I was about to get out of the car, but he stopped me and put his hand on my shoulder and said no, 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 and then asked me not to leave. He told me he's just angry, but that he'd drive me home. He put the car back in drive and started driving us. As we drove, he kept getting angrier, as he kept asking for more details of what he did wrong. He started blowing stop signs, and that's when I realized we weren't going in the direction of my parents' house. I asked him to pull over and let me out, and he yelled no. We were approaching some wooded area, and that's when I started getting really scared. I had never seen him like this before, but he was showing me a crazy side of himself. I got out of the car when he stopped it on the side of some quiet road. He yelled for me to come back, but I didn't. My mom came to pick me up. Mike sent me an apology text later that night that I didn't respond to. 2 nights later, I left my house to walk to Andrew's house, who I had plans to hang out with. He lived only 2 blocks away from me. On my way there, I spotted someone across the street, not too far behind me, walking about the same pace as me. They were wearing a hoodie with the hood up. I couldn't see their face. Foot traffic on our block wasn't too common, but it also wasn't super weird either. The closer I got to Andrew's house, the closer the person across the street got. As I continued up the street, I turned again and saw the person was now on the same side of the street as me. My heart started to race. I started walking faster. According to my phone, Andrew's house was coming up just on the right. I texted him to come outside please because I think I'm being followed. He replied back okay. I turned one more time as I heard the sound of shoes running on the sidewalk approaching from behind me, and I saw the guy in the black hoodie running at me. I screamed and ran as fast as I could for about 5 seconds, before seeing Andrew run to the front of his house in confusion. I turned around again and saw the guy in black running the opposite direction down the street. I keep saying the guy in black, but I know it was Mike. That guy had an identical height to him from what I could tell. A few instances happened after that, like getting calls with no caller ID and seeing Mike's car parked outside my parents' house in the middle of the night. My parents were aware of what was going on, and one day, my dad drove us over to Mike's house and knocked on the front door while I was in the car and had a long, loud talk with Mike's parents. I lowered the windows to listen, and most notably what my dad yelled was that he doesn't care how old Mike is, that it's still harassment, and if he keeps trying to contact me in any way, that we'd get police involved. It worked. Mike stopped trying to contact me after that. For those wondering, Andrew and I ended up dating for around a year. My relationship with Mike was an early lesson in my life to watch out for red flags. I'm part of this group that's centered around doing outdoorsy activities like hiking, snowboarding, mountain climbing, and so on. It started as a Facebook group and evolved into a closer-knit group of people, around 10 of us. Not all 10 or so people go to every outing, obviously. We once organized a trip to Adirondack Park where we could climb one of the many mountain trails. On this trip, it was only 4 of us, DeVito, James, and Christina. We brought sleeping bags and 2 tents. Since James and I were the only guys on this trip, we carried the extra weight of the tents in our bags. Because we wanted to experience this during the beautiful fall foliage, we went in the month of October. The weather was perfect, but still, once it started getting dark, we couldn't continue on the path, and we'd have to set up camp before it would get too dark to do even that. We set up camp on a hard rocky surface, and 3 of us started collecting wood for a little fire. James poured some lighter fluid into the pile of sticks and wood we collected, and that helped get it going. Sitting around the fire, we started to eat whatever foods we had packed while recounting about previous trips we'd taken together. That's when it first happened. A scream from the distance, a woman's scream. A scream that sounded as though someone was being attacked or feared for their lives echoed down the mountain. The 4 of us fell silent and looked at each other. Any of us who had food in our mouths had stopped chewing. We were all just frozen for a few seconds. The scream didn't repeat. We broke the silence by asking what we should do. We should have been alone this far into the trail. Then another sound echoed down the mountain, this one a loud popping sound. It didn't sound like a gunshot at all, but the best any of us could describe it was this high-pitched, loud, single popping sound. We now agreed to put the fire out and get in our tents. We didn't know who was out there or what was going on, and we didn't want to advertise our presence. I shared a tent with James while the girls shared the other tent. Falling asleep in a sleeping bag is always a tough task for me, and when you add hearing a blood-curdling scream out in the middle of nowhere not too far from you, it just makes it even harder. It was an hour or 2 that passed, and James seemed to have already fallen asleep. I was still rolling around from side to side, uncomfortable, when I heard another woman scream. This one was higher pitched and much, much closer. I sat up and looked at James, who was apparently woken up by the scream. We were scared to even leave the tent, because the scream was borderline right outside our campsite. We were discussing if we should wake the girls and pack it up and leave, but we'd have a long hike back in the dark ahead of us. We then heard footsteps outside our tent, the sound of shoes hitting the stone floor below us. I called both DeVito and Christina's names, expecting it to be them. But when they didn't answer and the footsteps stopped right outside the tent, I looked at James, who looked back at me with an equally horrified look on his face. Someone then started shaking our tent violently, and James and I started to scream, and we could hear the girls screaming in their tent as well in reaction to our screams. I said on the count of 3, we leave the tent and fight whoever was out there. I yelled my count to 3, and on 2, the shaking stopped. By 3, I unzipped the door to the tent, and the 2 of us crawled out from it expecting to see someone standing out there, but they had already disappeared into the darkness, probably still watching us. We ran to the girls' tent yelling their names, saying we gotta go. They crawled out with their backpacks and followed us. We went back for our backpacks too after seeing them with theirs, even though our lives could have been in danger. After grabbing our bags and leaving the tents and sleeping bags, we somehow navigated down the mountain through the dark without flashlights on, relying only on moonlight. We had to stop and sit multiple times to rest, but we never stopped to sleep again. Not like we even had the option anymore. Plus, we were paranoid that we were being tailed. We had to just keep moving for hours until we made it back to the car. James drove us 20 minutes down the road before stopping, and then we slept in the car. We all woke up past noon because of how much walking we did and how late we finally got to fall asleep. We told the whole group about it the next day on the drive home. To our knowledge, nothing ever came up on the news about any kind of murders or weird happenings in the Adirondacks around that time. It was in October of 2017 if anyone wants to do some detective work of their own. This still holds up as the scariest and overall worst night of my life. My uncle is notorious in my family for being a daredevil and always worrying my mom, other uncles, and grandma, especially considering he's been on multiple medications for decades. He's what you'd call an adrenaline junkie, and he's climbed over 5 mountains in his life, most notably Everest. Well, he's attempted Everest, but he didn't make it to the top. Something in his living on edge personality and mentality slightly changed after he attempted to climb Everest. I was just 10 years old when he did, and even I remember the change. It wasn't until 5 years later that I was told just what happened on Everest. My uncle went alone on his expedition, which may have been his biggest mistake. He said he stayed at base camp for a full day before continuing his climb beyond that point. At first his climb was easy, he says, and as one would imagine, it got gradually more difficult. Even though it's a well-known fact that many bodies of previous climbers are still to be found on the mountain, my uncle says he never expected to actually find one. He entered the death zone, which is the area of the mountain where the high altitude results in a lack of available oxygen for humans to breathe. This is usually above 8,000 meters, and most of the 200 plus climbers who've died on Everest have died in the death zone. People are advised to not stay in the death zone for more than 16 to 20 hours. While in this zone, my uncle saw his first dead body lodged in a ravine, and being the happy, uppity, bubbly person he is, it was a shock and truly disturbing to him. He described his mood change from, in his words, feeling alive and on top of the world, to in over his head and mortal. Nevertheless, he progressed onward, and when he was tired, he took a break and sat down. Seeing the corpse really messed with his head, and he mentioned that he was also starting to feel dizzy and lightheaded, likely due to the high altitude. My uncle didn't want to get up from his position. He felt like he was losing energy and began talking to himself. My uncle finally got up from his seated position after an hour and decided he didn't have it in him to make it up to the top. He started to make his way down, until another climber bumped into him and started telling him to come on, let's go, passing him and climbing further up the mountain where my uncle just came from. My uncle told the man he was not up for it and was going to make his way back down to base camp. He recounts that as the man spoke back to him, urging him to continue up the mountain, his voice was very echoey and surreal. My uncle said take care to the man and continue back down the way he came with his head spinning and feeling short of breath. As he continued his way down, every time he'd look up, the man would be behind him, smiling and making hand motions for my uncle to come back up. He thought smiling and ignoring it would be the best way to get him to leave him alone. After continuously looking back to that man following him, my uncle finally stopped and started firmly telling the man he wasn't feeling well and just wanted to get back to base camp. The man slightly above my uncle smiled once more and said, "Watch me go over the ledge." Then he walked to the edge of the snow and leaped down, disappearing under the edge. My uncle said that as he saw this, it snapped him out of his daze and he ran over to the edge to look down it. But there was nobody to be seen sliding down the edge of the mountain, no marks in the snow. He didn't even hear the sound of him sliding down the snow initially or anything. Witnessing this made my uncle hurry down the mountain even faster, until the next thing he remembered was darkness, then waking up at the base camp medical clinic in a bed. He had passed out and a couple passerbys found him and carried him down low enough to where a rescue helicopter could reach him. My uncle waited until the end of the story to tell me that he was off his meds for the entire trip, and mixed with the lack of air in the death zone, he started to quickly hallucinate and talk to himself. Upon getting home, he did some research on recent deaths on the mountain, and learned of a young man who had died climbing Everest that same week who looked just like the man in the hallucination. This is when he started to question if it was actually a hallucination or not. However, the death was reported before my uncle had this alleged hallucination. He still says he's not entirely sure what he saw was a hallucination. I don't press him for more details about this story, as like I said, it's changed him and it's clearly left some kind of mental scar on him. I can't imagine how horrific of an experience this was for him. I once drove up to Banff National Park in Canada for a day of hiking and climbing. The park is home to numerous mountain climbing trails and is a scenic escape from the city for me to clear my head. I was going through a recent breakup and wanted to get out and get my mind off of it, and I thought this was the best way to do that. I had all my necessary tools in my climbing pack, including rope, a helmet, harness, quick draws, and whatever else I could fit in the bag. I hiked through half a mile of forest until I found a good rock wall I wanted to scale. So I found a strong enough tree to use as my anchor point and wrapped some rope around it. You may be asking why I started from the top instead of the bottom. Well, normally if I were on a known route, there would be eye bolts that are anchored into the rock that I could have just clipped my carabiner to, and when the carabiner is attached, then I'd clip my rope. As I climb up, I would place another carabiner or anchor and so on. But since I was making my own route on this day, I had to anchor at the top of the climb, which is called top roping, and rappel myself down to set each bolt. At the end of all this, I'll be at the bottom and able to climb up after setting my own route. After I was all set to go, I started to rappel down the face and set my bolts. To skip all the mountain climbing terminology and talk, as I rappelled down, I eventually came across a cave in the face. It was literally this big hole in the mountain wall, but it seemed unusual to me because usually a cave entrance is ground level. I was intrigued, so I climbed inside of it. I had plenty of rope to allow me to go inside. I was sitting at the edge of this opening, looking inside, and it got pitch black in there not too far from the entrance. I wondered how big this cave was, and if it led to a separate entrance on the other side of the mountain. But more importantly, I picked up on this buzzing sound from deeper in the cave. It was this very low note kind of buzzing, like you'd almost miss it if you weren't paying attention. I walked very slowly deeper into the cave, and as the humming got slightly louder, I said hello into the cave. Not because I was expecting an answer from anyone, nor did I want an answer. I wanted to see how much of an echo there would be, to give me an idea of how deep this cave went, and there was quite a loud echo. But on top of that, the humming or buzzing sound stopped after I said it. I was creeped out, no doubt, but I was still intrigued as to what that buzzing sound could have been. I stepped just a little more into the cave, the rope starting to wedge at the top of the cave entrance now. I started to hear this slow, deep breathing, and I suddenly knew I wasn't in the cave alone. Perhaps there was an animal in there. I started to back away slowly out of the cave. When I felt I was close enough to the entrance of the cave, I took out my flashlight from my backpack, aimed it into the cave, and my finger quivered over the button for a few seconds. In a moment of poor judgment but pure curiosity, I turned the flashlight on and the cave lit up a bit. At first I thought it was just an empty cave, until I noticed the two heads peering to me from behind the curved cave wall. I could only see half their faces, but they looked sickly and decrepit. The way they were watching me, they were in the dark seconds ago, impossible for me to see, but them able to see me perfectly standing by the light near the entrance of the cave. I turned off the flashlight and ran for it back out of the cave. I started to climb back up the face when I felt a grip around my ankle trying to pull me back into the cave. I kicked as hard as I could at my attacker, and I felt my shoe hit their face. In response, the sickly-looking person let go, and I heard him make this horrible shriek of pain. He sounded less human and more like some literal cave-dwelling monster. I didn't look down. I climbed the rock wall faster than I'd ever climbed. I don't think either of those two barely human things I saw in that cave attempted to come out and grab me. I made it back to the top in a surprisingly quick amount of time due to adrenaline. The reason I didn't just allow the rope to safely descend me down to the bottom instead of climbing to the top was because I feared they would grab the rope and pull me back up. I carved 2 big X's at the top of the face, and then 2 more at the bottom, indicating to whoever passes by here not to climb here. I hiked my way all the way back to the side of the road where I parked my car. I had a long drive home lost in my thoughts, appreciating my life and scared shitless, wondering what the hell was wrong with those people in that cave. Why were they in there, and what were they going to do to me? I'm telling you, they looked pale and sickly. They were not regular people. I called the park warden's number and gave them the coordinates of the cave and told them about the dangerous, sickly-looking people hiding in there. I'll tell you one thing though, this experience definitely took my mind off my breakup for a while. These are 3 honeymoon stories. Oftentimes, newlyweds take their honeymoons in foreign countries where the locals may not always speak their native tongue. In one of these stories, that exact scenario proved to be a problem, as a matter of fact. Learning a second or third language can prove to be a very useful skill that will come in handy many times in your life, and the app Babbel has now made learning a new language easier and more fun. All you need is 10 to 15 minutes a day, and within 3 weeks, you'll be quickly picking up a new language. Unlike other language apps and websites that may teach you robotic phrases that not even natives may use, Babbel thrives on preparing you for conversational language that you will be able to use in the real world. Also be sure to check out Babbel Live, where you can also take online classes in real time for a more personal approach. Right now, if you buy 6 months, Babbel is offering you an additional 6 months for free. Check the link in the description. For my wife and I's honeymoon, we went to Hawaii. Our hotel was on Maui, which we heard was the best island for couples and honeymoons. The hotel was on the beach, and every night they'd have torch shows, luau's, and other kinds of live entertainment. During the first few days, we did a lot of drinking and restaurant hopping. On our fourth day, we wanted to explore one of the jungle hiking trails, as there are a bunch on the island, and it was on our bucket list for the trip. We drove our rental car a long drive to the nearest parking lot to PPY Trail, a long scenic trail in the bamboo forest in the jungle. The trail would eventually lead to numerous waterfalls and hidden ponds that you could swim in. We were told about it by some locals and other tourists, so that's what we wanted to do. There were a few cars in the parking lot, but the parking lot wasn't just for this one trail. Walking down the path for a while, it truly was just a wall of bamboo on either side of us. It was truly an environment I'd never seen before. My wife stopped us and pointed at a small animal slightly off the trail. It was a mongoose. It was stopped, looking at us, and we both thought it was adorable. My wife started approaching it slowly, bent down to appear smaller and less intimidating. I did the same. Of course, the little creature ran away pretty swiftly, and my wife chased after it goofily. I followed suit. As we got deeper into the jungle, straying away from the trail, we heard the sound of water. It was a waterfall nearby. We followed the sound of it until we came to this beautiful pond with a small waterfall pouring into it. We dipped our feet in the water, and it was a surprisingly comfortable temperature, and it was deep enough to submerge ourselves in. So we decided to do a little skinny dipping, knowing how unlikely it would be that anyone else would be here. Well, apparently we were wrong about that, because as we were in the water, my wife shrieked and said, "Oh my God," as she pointed at some older man in a straw hat with a long gray beard standing in the jungle half behind a tree, staring at us. I'm too nice of a person, so I waved for some dumb reason, instead of yelling to stop creeping on us, because that's what it looked like he was doing. He didn't wave back, he didn't smile, he didn't even move. I looked at my wife and said we should leave, but she didn't want to step out of the water naked for him to see. I kind of agreed. So now I called out to him, asking if he needed something, and only then he called back in a surprisingly deep voice, saying he's looking for his dog. I said we haven't seen it, and then he walked away. I said to my wife we need to go immediately. We got out of the water and got dressed, then tried to find the trail, but we couldn't find it. We strayed far enough away from it that we were apparently lost. We had lost the direction we came from, and there was no cell reception out here. It was getting late in the day, and panic was setting in. By the time the sun was setting, my wife was in tears. All the while, as it got darker and darker, we felt as though we were being followed, hearing footsteps every now and then. It reached the point where the jungle was completely dark now, and we had to use our flashlights on our dying phones. But when we heard footsteps coming from behind us again, I whispered to my wife to turn it off to not reveal ourselves. We felt like we were being followed for hours. After turning out the lights, it was pitch black for a second, until my eyes started adjusting to the darkness. As soon as that happened, I noticed the figure about 10 feet away, and it was slowly creeping closer. I backed away slowly as I pushed my wife behind me. I said, "What do you want?" in a very nervous voice. My wife apparently didn't see him, because she turned her phone's flashlight back on and aimed it at the figure, revealing it to be that old man with a straw hat and beard holding a hacksaw. We both screamed. My wife let out a scream of fear while I screamed "Go, go, go" to her. We ran through the jungle without any lights. There was just enough light to barely see where we were going. We ran and ran and ran, thankfully wearing sneakers and hiking attire. Eventually I got cell reception, so we followed the map back to the parking lot we came from, which took a good 10 to 15 minutes of running. We made it back to the car, and at that point, it felt like we were given a new chance at life. The next day we went straight to the Maui Police Department and reported the whole incident in an attempt to warn other tourists who may be visiting that specific trail. After that, we tried the best we could to continue our honeymoon, but it definitely put a damper on things. My honeymoon was in Sicily. Our hotels were in Palermo, Cefalu, and Messina in that order. While in Messina, we did most of the sightseeing at sites like Taormina. Messina was packed with beautiful old architecture and museums to explore, which is what my wife Patricia and I enjoy the most. Messina is a port-heavy city, and like the rest of Sicily, there are a lot of English-speaking tourists, but also a lot of Italian-speaking locals. We don't really speak any Italian beyond maybe an elementary level. We'd have a lot of locals approaching us trying to sell us things. At night, the vibe where we were was fun. Lots of music, people drinking and dancing and whatnot. We were partaking a little bit, while also continuing to walk around and explore. The night got the better of us, and we ended up getting pretty drunk, and the time flew by. Pretty soon it was past midnight, and things outside on the streets were simmering down. We took a wrong turn back to our hotel, and kind of lost our way. Eventually we ended up in this sketchy alleyway, and Patricia was getting upset that we seemed to be entering a sketchy area. I put my arm around her to make her feel safer. Suddenly some guy came up to us obnoxiously close, speaking Italian like a machine gun, so quick we couldn't even attempt to understand any words. We couldn't tell if he was angry or concerned, but he seemed frantic. He kept saying this word phantasma. At that moment, I didn't know what that word meant. I pushed the guy out of our faces and walked Patricia and I quickly out of the alleyway. He yelled more stuff at us in Italian. I didn't understand a single word of it. As we got away from him, I googled what the word phantasma meant, because it was the only word that he kept repeating that stood out. It means ghost, and when we found that out, we looked at each other. I couldn't help but nervously laugh to try to get Patricia to laugh as well, simply because it sounded ridiculous. We were in this dark, sketchy area of the city for sure. There didn't seem to be anyone else around. We'd normally call an Uber, but it's not even a thing in Sicily, so we had to walk it. I have to admit, I was probably as uncomfortable as Patricia, as we'd heard certain parts of the city were unsafe at night. There was this quiet woman's crying sound coming from behind us all of a sudden. We both heard it, and we both looked back. There was this young but freakishly tall woman about 10 yards away from us, walking slowly in our direction. Her face was buried in her hands. Her height was actually unnaturally tall. She looked taller than me. In fact, it was so creepy that even Patricia, who's usually a sweet, nurturing person, whispered that we should get the hell away from her. We jogged down this narrow street and turned left to another alleyway. And we turned back again to the crying sounds. That woman was now at the end of this alleyway, just behind us, but still walking at the same slow speed, her face still buried in her hands. It felt like we were in this channel of alleyways and narrow one-way streets, and every time we turned, we'd still hear the crying behind us. It only stopped when we made it back to, I guess, what you'd call one of the main roads with other civilian traffic besides us. From there, we simply walked back to the hotel. Patricia kept insisting what we saw was a ghost, and every time she said it, it gave me chills. This story doesn't do it any justice in explaining just how disturbing seeing that tall, lanky woman walking towards us in that alleyway was. Not to mention that guy say the word ghost in Italian over and over. I'm not ruling it out as some kind of crazy over-the-top joke. For all I know, we ended up on some Italian YouTube prank channel. But Patricia insists on believing it was actually a ghost we saw, and it still gives me chills thinking about that possibility. We aren't the richest couple out there. We both work 9-to-5 jobs to make ends meet. We're doing all right now, but back when we got married, we were struggling. So when it came time for our honeymoon, we couldn't go all out and blast all our money. My wife, who I'll choose to keep nameless, was doing research for affordable beach getaways, and she found a private house in the Bahamas for 3 nights on Airbnb, so we went with that. After flight tickets and the cost for the rental, it didn't even come out to that much. Upon arrival, we entered the code for the padlock on the door to let ourselves into the home. It had a spacious living room and kitchen, a large bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a big back deck that led to the private beach. We spent all of the first day on the beach, then walked to a nearby restaurant for dinner. When we got back, this is where the weird things started happening. As soon as we walked in the door, we noticed things seemed like they were in the wrong places, like our sandals, our bags, and so on. Nothing was missing though, so we accused each other of having moved the stuff beforehand. We jumped in the hot tub that was on the back deck for a while, until we both heard something from inside the house, like a bang or a door closing. I got out from the hot tub to check, dripping all over the floor of the house. All the doors were closed though. I didn't remember if they were open earlier or not. Regardless, I checked the room and it was clear of any intruders, as well as the bathroom. I went back outside to grab a towel and put my clothes on. I was done in the hot tub anyway, and so was my wife, though I was growing a little suspicious, or cautious you might say. The second day we sat on the beach for a while again, then went to some of the touristy areas of the Bahamas and did dinner. When we got back, again, we felt like things were different. Our stuff seemed to be in the same spots, but the bathroom and bedroom doors were open, and we didn't remember keeping them open. We knew it was possible we were being paranoid now and didn't actually remember how the doors were left, but still it was getting uncomfortable now. We made sure all the windows and doors were locked, and we skipped the hot tub that night. We just watched movies on the TV in the living room, as there was a bunch of included streaming services on there. There was no upstairs to the house, yet we thought we could hear little taps and whatnot above our heads. Maybe the roof? Maybe an iguana or some similar creature? At this point, we were even starting to think there might be some kind of Bahamian creepy crawly in the house. It seemed like a more logical explanation as to there being an intruder in this relatively small space. That night, I was in bed before my wife. She was in the shower when I heard her scream. I basically exploded out of bed to run into the bathroom. She turned the water off by then and told me that there was something in the vent above the shower. I got on the ledge of the tub and looked in it, but it was too dark in there. However, I did hear some tiny noises coming from in there. This almost confirmed that there was a rodent or some small creature in the vents of the house. Still, we had one more day, it wasn't our problem. We went to bed together. The next thing I remember was waking up to my wife shaking me. She had this horrified look on her face that immediately sent shivers down my spine. She told me to listen, and the silence of the room allowed me to hear it. This frantic whispering sound coming from the ceiling, particularly one of the ceiling vents. That was it. I grabbed my phone to call the owner of the Airbnb. I heard the ringing, but simultaneously I heard this vibrating sound from above us. Immediately I started to think, wait, is there an upstairs that the owner is living in? The vibrating above us stopped almost as quickly as it started, but the call was still ringing on my end. Curiously, I took my phone's flashlight and aimed it up through the vents, and for just a split second, I saw someone looking down through the vent into the room. Most notably, I saw their eyes. We packed all of our important stuff as quickly as we could. It took all of about 30 seconds and we were out the front door. We ran through the sandy dirt road until we came to a street, then we stopped to catch our breaths. We stayed in a cheap hotel that night and the next night as well. The last day we spent most of it waiting at the airport, but we reported this incident to Airbnb and we got all of our money back, and I'm pretty sure Airbnb banned the owner of that house's account. We didn't pursue anything further with legal action, as we were just happy to get our money back. Nothing of ours was missing, but who the hell knows what kind of shady shit he was doing there when we weren't in the house. I was assigned as a security guard with the midnight shift at a very large Omaha warehouse when I was a young man. This building was mainly used for storage and it was huge. We as security personnel were tasked with hitting several stations inside this building on the night shift, and this required that we did a lot of walking. There would always be 2 personnel assigned to the warehouse at night, one patrolling the outside perimeter in a car, and one inside the warehouse on foot. Being outside, sitting in the comfort of a car was obviously the more desirable of the two. I was working a Wednesday night. I was about half an hour into my shift. I would start the shifts walking around for about an hour, just surveilling the place before sitting down in one of the security offices. This room had some low-budget, ancient camera system that at the time was impressive technology, but it only had 2 screens because there were only 2 cameras in the entire warehouse, one in the northeast corner and one in the southwest corner. That's why we couldn't just sit on our butts in the security office our entire shifts and had to actually patrol the place. This was a shared warehouse for some tech companies, and a lot of expensive equipment was held here, hence why 2 security guards would have to be there every single night. The warehouse layout was similar to that of a regular grocery store. There were like 10 to 15 aisles, and one intersecting aisle that cuts between the other 10 to 15 in the middle. I was still making my initial rounds around the place, when I saw all the way down at the end of the aisle I was in, something at the end section. It was like this white thing that kind of resembled the shape of a head, and it was poking out from behind the end section. Mind you, it was so far away that all I could make from it was this white-looking object. I elevated my slow stroll to a moderately quick speed walk, and halfway through the aisle, the white thing disappeared behind the tower of boxes. This confirmed my fear that it was a person, and that I wasn't alone in there. I now ran to the end of the aisle, hoping to see the other night guard walking around or something. As I stood in the southwest corner of this giant warehouse, I looked up at the camera in the corner, and it was pointing in the direction of the thing I just saw. I looked in that direction, and there it was again, at maybe the 7th aisle, that white thing I saw earlier. Now it was a lot closer, and I could make it out to be someone's face, as I feared. But it wasn't the other security guard. It was this extremely pale, ghoulish-looking face. They once again slowly hid their face behind the tower of boxes. I walkie-talkied the other guard on duty, and he radioed back that he was in the car by the back section of the parking lot. He said roger that, he'd be here in 5. Getting off the phone with him, I was nervous to approach the aisle that I saw the person's head. Even though this is exactly what a security guard's purpose and job is, you never actually expect or anticipate seeing any action. I took a deep breath and ran to that aisle and stopped at the end of it to look down it. The person wasn't in sight. I figured they must have ran for it. So I ran halfway down hoping to catch up to them, but I stopped when I smelt this horrible putrid odor. It smelled like a dead, rotting carcass. I followed the scent until it became overwhelming, and I found the source of it. It was coming from this big wooden box that was different from the rest of the boxes. I pulled the lid off the box, and inside was a dead body laying in a pool of blood. The most shocking part of it was that it was missing a head. I walkie-talkied to the other security guard again, and yelled at him to call the police and report a dead body in the warehouse. I said this all while running as fast as I could to the back exit of the warehouse, struggling to get enough air. I threw up the second I made it out the door. I ran to the other security guard's car and sat in there with him, gasping for air. He was still on the phone with the police, so I took the phone and told them whatever the other security guy didn't. Given the nature of the situation, they sent like 5 or 6 cop cars and basically had the entire place surrounded. The body was loaded into an ambulance, and for a good chunk of the night, police were in the warehouse doing forensic work. Perhaps the weirdest part of all of this was that when trying to go back to the video footage captured from the night before, the footage cut out for about 3 hours in the middle of the night. There was no explanation for this happening. I've thought about this night for almost my entire life, basically. I don't believe in ghosts or anything, but I don't really have an explanation for this. I've thought about some far-fetched possibilities, though, like that whoever the murderer was in the warehouse that night and was holding up the severed head of that body, hence why it looked so pale and ghoulish. In fact, it gave me chills just now thinking about it again. Several years ago, 2 friends and I heard from a mutual friend about this creepy abandoned warehouse or furniture store that was only a few miles from my house. One night while on a drive, the 3 of us decided to check it out. We parked at a Walgreens a few hundred yards from the warehouse and started walking towards it. As we got closer, my friend, I'll call him Jim, kinda chickened out and stayed back while me and my other friend, I'll call Mark, continued on. As we approached the right side of the building, it became very obvious that this place had been abandoned for a very long time. The front entrance was boarded up, and there were vines and ivy growing all over the building. Our mutual friend said that the only way in was through a busted-in wall in the back. We went around back, and sure enough, there was a broken-in narrow section of wall we could get in through. We stepped in, and it was completely dark. We couldn't see our hands in front of our faces, so we turned on the flashlights on our phones and looked around. There was trash and debris everywhere on the concrete floors. We were in what appeared to be the main room of the old store, and it was huge. An entire football field could probably fit in this room. We could even hear an echo when we talked. We started looking along the walls, which were covered in graffiti. The graffiti was littered with what must have been gang symbols as well as profanity, as you would expect. What was really unsettling, though, was that as we moved further along the back wall, the graffiti was getting more and more disturbing. One of them read, "Kill yourself tonight." Then the graffiti was getting satanic. There were tons of inverted crosses, pentagrams, 666s, and violent scenes depicted. While this stuff was creepy enough, it wasn't the worst of what we saw. Towards the end of the building, there were some steps leading to smaller rooms. As we shone our lights on the steps, we saw a large, dry pool of what was probably blood all over the steps. This deterred us from exploring the smaller rooms beyond, so we headed to the left side of the room. As we were walking, our lights caught something hanging from the ceiling. We got closer and saw what it was. It was a noose, still hanging from one of the rafters. It became very obvious that the people that come to this place use it for very evil purposes. After that, we decided we'd spend enough time in there and headed for the hole in the wall we entered through. We got outside and saw that there was another, smaller building/warehouse behind the main one. Despite the freaky things we saw inside, we were still curious and decided to check this one out too. One thing that was very odd was that there was a small room in the front of the warehouse that had no doors, only one window. Inside was a large inverted cross hanging from the decrepit ceiling. We came to the left side of the warehouse where the large garage-style entrance was. This building was similar to the first one. It was one large empty room with tons of trash everywhere. There was more disturbing graffiti. However, there were these holes at the base of the walls that were really odd looking. We shined our lights down them but couldn't see the bottom. What were these for? We had seen enough at this point and headed back outside. It was then that my friend Mark got a call from Jim. As he was talking to Jim, his face suddenly changed to a downright horrified expression. I said, "What's wrong?" What he said next sent a chill down my spine. "Someone else is here," he said. Before we could even turn to run, a white truck peeled around the corner at an alarming speed, heading right towards us. We started booking it towards my car, and as we got around the other back corner of the building, we saw another black truck parked alongside. But we kept running as fast as we could, and thankfully the three of us made it back to my car. We got in and peeled out of there. I don't know what those guys in the trucks were there for, or why they chased after us, but based on what we saw in those buildings, it wasn't anything good. Thankfully, we never found out, and we never returned to that place. In my mid-20s, I used to be a party planner and event coordinator. I was basically in charge of throwing dope parties for this record label group. I'd have to rent out venues for a night or weekends, which would allow us to host our events in these places. Usually we wouldn't pay until after the event, and the landlord or owner of whatever property we were using would take a cut of the profits. There was this one time that my group rented this big warehouse for an entire weekend, and we would be hosting parties Friday and Saturday night. Once the place was rented out, I had to do a lot of setting up, which included setting up tables for bottle service, setting up portable bars, and a DJ stand. A lot of work would go into these kinds of pop-up venues, but they were always extremely profitable. My buddy Jack, who was also on the event planning team, was helping me on the Wednesday before the party weekend. He drove a truck full of equipment to the empty parking lot that the warehouse sat in. I was having trouble figuring out how to get the power to a certain part of the warehouse activated. I looked for any kind of electrical panel or circuit breaker box, but I was having trouble finding one. I gave the building owner I dealt with a call, and he picked up almost right away. His name's Carter. He told me exactly where to go for the electrical panel that would turn on the specific lights I was looking for. He directed me to a door that had an exit sign on top of it, but it wasn't on. Through this door, I was in a very short, very narrow space with a door on one side which I presume led to the outside, and then a half flight of stairs on the other side. I was supposed to go down this half flight of stairs, which led to another tight space with a couple doors. This room was hard to explain without just seeing it for yourself. I'm 6'4", so I had to bend down a little bit just so my head wouldn't hit the ceiling. That's how cramped it was down there. This level had very dim nightlight kind of lights hung on the ceiling. Dim but enough light to navigate just fine. I found the electrical panel, and Carter told me exactly which switches to flip. Then I shut the panel door and turned the key to lock it, even though he told me to just leave the key in the lock. I thanked him and our call ended. I heard a loud and obvious buzzing sound that would be going off in spasms. I followed the sound of it to a door leading to a pitch-black room. Pulling the door open was hard as it scraped against the concrete floor. There was this red light in the top corner of the room that synchronized with the buzzing sound. When the buzzing stopped, the light would also turn off. I was trying to figure out what it was, but it didn't make sense. I stepped deeper into the room and noticed whenever I moved, the light would turn on and the buzzing would sound. When I stood still, it stopped. I don't know why, but I was creeped out, so I went back to the doorway of the room. I took one more look inside, and the red light turned on again, lighting up the room with this eerie red glow. I decided to call Carter and tell him about the potential problem with the light and the buzzing. He told me calmly that the light was a motion sensor, and the buzzing was because that one in the basement was busted. I asked what he meant by motion sensor, and he explained that there's at least one in every room in the building, as it's part of the security system. I looked back into the room, and the light was still on. I asked what could be setting it off in there, and he said he had no idea. and that's when I spotted it. There was someone, I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman because of the long disheveled hair, sitting in one corner of this room, half hidden behind a pile of old boxes. Their eyes were the most noticeable feature because of how goddamn wide they were open. The mouth was like a half smile, and they were moving their arm in a manner that was as if to tell me to come here. I know it took me a few seconds to describe this person just now, but I was literally screaming at the sight of them in under a second. I slammed that door shut and ran back up the stairs and out that exit door. I told Carter we were leaving and not using the warehouse anymore. I didn't ask any more questions after that. I didn't care, it was his problem. I yelled at Jack to get everything he could back into the truck. We collected our stuff as quickly as possible, loaded the truck back up, and left. I didn't even bother locking the door to the warehouse. I just wanted to be far away from there. I still today don't know what to make of it. The Carter guy seemed so weirdly calm about my telling him about a deranged-looking person in the basement of his warehouse. Thinking back, that light was probably going off because of that person sitting in the corner waving me over, or doing whatever the hell he or she was doing with their arm. It was a truly nightmare-inducing, horrible experience. So this happened on a camping trip with my girlfriend Alicia, my best friend Rodney, and his girlfriend Amanda. My dad told me about a perfect place to go camping right by a big lake surrounded by dense forest. A trail from a nearby parking lot would lead straight to the lake. His directions were straightforward, and it was actually easy to get to the lake. We got there as the sun was on its way down and the sky was turning that beautiful orange. The lake was calming, and the sound of the breeze hitting the leaves was peaceful. We had our tent set up, and there was still a hint of orange in the sky, though it was very dark in the woods by now. There was a slight orange reflection on the calm lake. It was very warm out, and Amanda suggested we all jump in the water. I was kind of up for it, as my dad said it would be perfect to jump in. For that reason, we all brought towels. The girls seemed more eager than Rodney and I, though. The two got into their underwear and walked into the lake, exclaiming it was actually warm. I told them I'd go in after setting up the campfire at least, since we had already gathered some wood. Starting the fire proved to be especially difficult for me, because I just couldn't get the wood to catch. I'm not exactly a Boy Scout. Rodney took over, and as I watched him try to start the fire, one of the girls started screaming and flailing around in the lake. Amanda looked just as confused as Rodney and I. Then Alicia went underwater for a few seconds, and Amanda started to scream she's drowning. I took off my shirt and ran as fast as I could into the water. But when I got to where she was, the water was only up to maybe my waist. I saw her arms still flailing out above the water and splashing about, and I pulled her up above the water. I yelled, "What the hell happened?" She didn't answer right away and ran straight for the campsite, seemingly out of breath. Halfway there, she turned and yelled, "Get out of the water." Amanda and I looked at each other and listened. As I began moving out of the lake, I felt something strong grab around my ankle and try pulling me down. There was a sharp, piercing feeling cutting into my ankle as well. I yelled in a panic and kicked whatever it was with my free leg until I was able to break free. We made it back to the campsite, and Alicia was already sitting down on a cooler, putting pressure on an apparent wound on her ankle. I sat down on another cooler and checked my ankle, and there was a deep but small gash on the right side of my ankle which was pouring out blood. I told Rodney to get us both some band-aids from my first aid kit in the tent. After patching up the wounds, we felt more relaxed and at ease. We just wanted to figure out what the hell that was that grabbed us. I said it might have been an eel. Rodney questioned if eels even live in lakes like this. Alicia said it didn't feel like an eel or a fish. It felt more like a claw. I got chills as she said it, because I got what she was saying, but how would that make any sense? Regardless, we stuck around because whatever got us was in the water, and we were on land. Nothing could happen now. By this point it was dark out, The sun was completely gone, and the only light was from the fire. We were a couple beers deep, talking about life, about mutual friends, and occasionally bringing up that thing in the water again. All was well, until a splash came from out in the water. We all looked over our shoulders at the same time out to the pitch-black lake. Probably just a fish, we figured. We resumed conversation for a few seconds, but then there was another splash. It didn't sound like a little fish jumping out of the water. It sounded like the kind of splashes you'd hear when a person is walking through waist-deep water. The girls wanted us to go check the lake, so Rodney and I took a couple flashlights and went to the edge of the lake, where we were still hearing noises. With the 2 lights pointed at the water, we scanned the calm surface of the lake until Rodney stopped me and said, "What is that?" I looked at where his light was pointed. There was this object in the water. Well, at first I thought it was an object, but then I realized it resembled the head of some creature. Definitely not any kind of creature that would live in a lake. It seemed like it was just sticking its head out of the water, and we could see the reflection of its eyes. It was looking at us. Then it moved, as it rised up slightly out of the lake, making another splashing noise. That's when Rodney and I screamed "Go" to the girls. I remember Rodney saying, "Take all your important stuff and go," which was a smart idea. I took all my valuables and left the tent and bigger things. We ran back down the trail to the parking lot, packed the car, and took off down the parkway. The next day, I returned with my dad to collect the tents, but everything that we left in the campsite was destroyed. The tents were shredded, the coolers were scratched and thrown across the site. I told my dad about the creature in the lake. I showed him the gash in my ankle and asked him what could have done this. He said he had no earthly idea, and we left in a hurry. None of us ever returned to that lake.
My house sits next to a nature preserve on Long Island, New York. I live alone most of the time, besides when my girlfriend who lives out of state comes to visit. Well, I can't say I live completely alone. I have 2 German shepherds, Tate and Moose. They sleep downstairs by the back door of the house. Last week, for 3 nights in a row, I would wake up to the 2 of them barking in the middle of the night at the back door. The first night, I just peeked from the door window into the yard, which was empty. The second night, I actually went outside to the patio to look around, but there wasn't anyone there. On the 3rd night in a row of waking up to barking, I told myself that was it. Someone was creeping around my property every night, causing my dogs to go crazy. I put Tate on his leash and took him out to the yard. Weirdly, he seemed more calm now that he was outside. He wasn't barking at anything. I walked him around the backyard and by the tree line to the woods for a little bit, trying to help him pick up on whatever the 2 had been barking at the past 3 nights. Then he started. By the tree line, he started tugging on his leash and barking at something in the woods. Obviously, I couldn't see too far into the woods as it was nighttime, so I let him lead the way into the woods. If someone were to be trespassing on my property every night, I figured the best way to scare them off would be having my dog chase after them. Tate kept pulling and barking as we got deeper into the woods. I was starting to lose my breath just trying to keep up with him. He seemed to be really locked into something specific in front of us. But eventually Tate stopped pulling and barking, and just stood there with his ears bent back, as if he were in a defensive position. He suddenly looked scared, as if he was looking straight ahead at something. I tried looking ahead into the dark woods, but I could only see so much. There was this cracking of a stick or small branch a little ahead that confirmed there was a presence with us in the woods. I took this as a time to call out, "Whoever's out there, you need to stop trespassing on my property. If you don't, I'll either unleash my dogs on you or call the police. Whichever I feel necessary to do." There was no kind of response or signs of acknowledgement, just another crunch of a twig or stick being pressed into the ground by something, once again confirming there was someone or something standing maybe 10 yards away. I whistled to Tate to follow as I turned us around and headed back to the house. Tate kept looking back every 3 seconds. I'd have to pull him forward just to keep us moving. But then I heard a footstep close behind us, and Tate started to growl and bark again. It was now that I truly started to feel threatened. I didn't have my phone on me, I didn't have my flashlight, my only sense of protection was Tate. Then there was this sound. This unexplainable sound. It was this clicking type noise mixed with this humming sound, almost like a giant bug. Tate started going crazy again. He was barking and pulling, but I held him back. I kept looking at what he was trying to lunge towards, and I finally saw something. There was a set of glowing eyes, only the eyes were set very high off the ground, not down low like from a cat or raccoon. I started to run back towards my house now. I could see the light from my back patio shining through the trees now. I made it through the tree line back to my backyard. I ran Tate to the back door and let him inside. I turned back to the trees at the opposite end of my yard and I just stood there, listening and waiting for anything. A rustle in the bush made me turn my head about 20 degrees to the right. I saw a figure standing in the woods near the tree line. My patio light lit up the outline of the body somewhat. It looked like it had the shape of a humanoid-like figure, but it was crouched down, kind of hiding behind a little bush. It had extremely long-looking arms in comparison to the rest of its body, and on the lower half of its face, all I saw was black, almost resembling a big gaping mouth. I keep saying it because I knew what I was looking at couldn't be human. I went inside, shut all the blinds, and took my dogs upstairs to my room. I reported an unidentified creature in the preserve to the police. I gave my best description on the phone, and the woman on the other end asked me to call back if the person or creature were to actually enter my private property. Basically, calling the police was for my own peace of mind. But they didn't send anyone. I've been having my dog sleep in my room with me since last week, and there have been no further sightings since. I'll update everyone if anything changes.
My wife and I have lived in our Chapel Hill, Tennessee farmhouse for over 15 years, and for 14 straight years, nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. Our kids have all moved out. It's just me and the wife in the house now. February of 2019, bizarre things started happening. I woke up in the night to my wife shaking me. She said she heard a noise outside the window. She wanted me to go check. I simply walked over to the window, lifted it up, and had myself a look outside. It was chilly out there, so I didn't want to be looking outside for long, but the coast was clear. I shut the window and assured my wife it was okay, then crawled back into bed. Before we could even fall asleep again, there was a noise that made both of us sit up. A sharp but quick click at the window. My wife is no scaredy cat, but she grabbed my arm, clearly worried. She asked me to take the shotgun out there and see who it was. I told her to relax, and I checked the window one more time. I was shocked to find a small scratch in the glass from the other side. I said, "Honey, look at this," and she came over. She put her hands over her mouth and said, "Oh my." What did it? We didn't have a clue. Must have been some big animal, I figured. The next morning, I went outside to inspect the outside by the window. There were no footprints in the dirt by the side of the house. Nothing strange at all outside, actually. So we move on to the next night. It was a rainy, warmer night for February. My wife and I tucked in under the sheets again, and once again there was a sound that could be heard over the rain outside. It was this scraping type sound, muffled of course because it was coming from outside. The sound seemed to be moving closer to the window, then it stopped. My wife and I, sitting up again, looked at each other, and she didn't even have to tell me to go outside this time. I took the shotgun from under the bed again, put on my raincoat, and ran outside as fast as my old bones would allow. My wife turned on the light in the bedroom, which gave me enough light to see these huge scrapes in the vinyl siding. They looked exactly like claw marks. Then I looked down into the mud that I was standing in, and noticed these big feet marks that stopped right before the window, and then turned back in the direction of the woods. I analyzed the marks the best I could, even though they were quickly washing away from the rain. These didn't look like marks from boots, shoes, or any animal that I knew of. They looked like these huge footmarks with claws on the ends. We don't have black bears where we live. 15 years here and we've never seen one, so this just made no sense. I suddenly felt unsafe being out there, even with the shotgun, so I hurried back inside. I told my wife there's some big animal out there, and that as long as we stayed inside, we were safe. We don't have blinds on our bedroom windows, as we don't need privacy from anyone. No one comes out on the property anyway. All I could do was tell my wife to go to sleep. The next night was where things really took the turn for the worst. I woke up around 3 a.m. My wife was still asleep. I sat up, thinking I might have heard something. I realized it was chilly in the room. I looked at the window, and it was open, but that wasn't the first thing I noticed. The first thing I noticed was the head, leaning through the open window into our bedroom. My best description of the head? Inhuman. From the size and shape. It was bigger, and this had a more conish shape. As for facial features, it was just too dark to see any, and it all happened too quickly. I let out one big scream, the type of scream I hadn't heard leave my own body in decades. I went under the bed for the shotgun, but by then, the thing at the window was already gone. My wife was screaming in reaction to my scream. I ran to the window to slam it shut and twist the lock. I told my wife we're sleeping in our son's old room that night. Believe it or not, this was almost a year ago now, and that creature, whatever it was, has never returned. But for 3 straight days, that thing kept coming back to our window, and on the 3rd night, it was halfway into our bedroom. I'm a single mother of 2. My ex-husband and I take turns watching the kids month to month. My son Luke is 15 and my daughter Melissa is 10. This happened just a few months ago. I did some late-night grocery shopping after work. Luke had texted me earlier that he was going out with his friends. It was a Friday night. I wasn't thrilled with him leaving Melissa alone, but 10 is the age a lot of parents are more comfortable leaving their kids alone, and he knows I can't expect him to babysit her anymore. I got back to the house around 9 o'clock at night. I had to make 3 or 4 trips from the car to the house because of the amount of groceries I bought. I always overdo it with the groceries on the months I get to watch the kids. And then on the months alone, I'm the complete opposite. When I finally finished putting all the groceries in the fridge and pantry, I went upstairs to greet Melissa. I heard the shower running in the bathroom, so I went back downstairs to lay down in the living room and put on my show on Netflix. I was halfway through an episode, and I still hadn't heard Melissa leave the bathroom upstairs. Long hot showers aren't free, and I never condone my kids wasting water. I went up there to knock on the door and tell her to get out of the shower soon. I went back downstairs to resume my show. Only for about 5 minutes, though. Melissa was still in the shower, so I went back up there again and knocked louder. This time I waited for her to acknowledge me, but when she didn't, I continued to knock louder and yell her name angrily. It took me a little bit to notice through the bottom crack of the door that the light was off in the bathroom. I tried the doorknob, but the door was locked. The locks on my doors inside the house are easily unlocked with a fingernail, though, so I had to force my way in, now growing concerned. As the door opened, I yelled into the room at my daughter, at that moment feeling more furious than anything. I flicked the light switch up and went over to the tub. I yanked the curtain half open, honestly not knowing what to expect. But not in my worst nightmare would I have expected to find some 50-something-year-old withered-looking woman laying flat in the bathtub with the shower spraying water onto her. I screamed so loud and long until I lost the ability to scream for a few seconds. I had my back pressed up to the mirror. Everything on the counter had fallen to the ground. I felt an unexplainable sense of shock and horror. The woman stood up in the tub looking at me, her hair and clothes obviously drenched. I slammed the bathroom door shut and screamed Melissa's name. I checked her room first thing, and I found her hiding under the covers. I grabbed her and tugged her out of the room. As we passed the bathroom door towards the stairs, that woman was standing in the doorway of the bathroom. Everything about her looked like a zombie. Her eyes, her movement. I made sure to grab my cell phone before locking the 2 of us in the spare room in the basement. I called the police, and as I waited for the police to come, Melissa told me she thought it was me who came into the house, but when she saw some random, scary-looking woman walking up the stairs, she ran to her room to hide. Luke left the front door unlocked when he left. The police showed up in a timely manner. I talked to the police and told them exactly what Melissa told me. I described the woman's appearance, noting she was also soaked, and because of that I couldn't give a good description of her hair besides long and graying. This was all after making sure the woman was no longer in the house. Not under a bed, not in a closet, not behind a shower curtain. She simply left the house as easily as she entered. It's likely she was drugged out of her mind. I'd never seen someone who looked like they were literally lacking consciousness yet still walking. I don't even know if I would have been able to press any charges on her if she was found, which she wasn't. And don't you worry, I properly scolded and reprimanded Luke. Always remember to lock your doors. This was over 15 years ago. We once went to this family resort in New York State. We took our 2 kids who were 4 and 6 at the time. This focuses on our 6-year-old Michael Jr. We were on vacation around Easter time, so the resort had a bunch of fun little festivities set up for the kids, like Easter egg hunts, Easter decorations during bingo, and someone walking around in a big Easter bunny costume. While we were in the dining hall one evening, the Easter bunny was walking around giving kids high fives. When he came over to our table, our 4-year-old Peter hid under the table crying, but Michael Jr. gave him the high five and wasn't afraid at all. The guy in the bunny suit walked away quickly, probably to get our son to stop crying. The next day there was an Easter egg hunt, which was in one of the fields by the kids' center of the resort. I watched the kids scrambling to collect eggs while my husband Mike was elsewhere. I'm not really sure what he was doing. The Easter bunny guy was walking around the field interacting with the kids. I noticed he knew to avoid Peter. Peter came running to me when the Easter bunny got near to him. He would do the same thing with Santa around the holidays. The guy in the bunny suit was interacting with Michael a lot. I found it kind of cute. I just didn't want Peter around him so that he wouldn't start crying again, so I brought him to the other side of the play area for a little while. When it looked like the Easter bunny was gone, I walked him back to where Michael Jr. was last, but I couldn't see him. I started calling his name. Then another parent came up to me and asked if I was looking for a boy wearing a red sweater. I said yes, and she told me the guy in the Easter bunny costume walked him out of the field area in the direction of the parking lots. She told me this in a slightly concerned-sounding tone. I picked up Peter and ran in the direction that the woman pointed. I ran faster than I ever could, while holding my son on top of it. Motherly instincts clearly kicking in, giving me an adrenaline boost. I saw the man in the Easter bunny costume holding my child's hand, approaching a black car. I screamed at the top of my lungs at him to get away from my son. Then I screamed Michael's name. They both turned to look at us, and the man let go of my son's hand. Michael ran over to me, not realizing at all the danger he was just in. The man in the costume said to me that he was trying to find his mom since he looked lost, but that was total BS. He was about to get in his car with my 6-year-old son. I tried to yank the mask off of him, but he shoved me and yelled at me to piss off. Then he got in his car and drove away. I tried to remember his plate number, but he was gone too quickly. I called my husband on my old archaic cell phone, and I brought my kids to the front desk of the resort to meet him there. They said the man in the Easter bunny costume didn't work there. I was livid, yelling at the front desk workers the whole time, who were apparently aware of the man, yet didn't stop him or question him. We threatened to sue the entire place. They ended up refunding us for our entire stay, which we gladly accepted. But I was mere seconds away from losing my kid forever. We adopted our son Charlie at the age of 2. He's aware that he was adopted. We were honest with him about that ever since he started to learn to speak. He's now 7 years old. We don't have any children of our own because my wife can't have kids. Somewhat recently, my wife and I started noticing very strange behavior with Charlie, and what motivated me to actually sit down and write this was something my wife and I still can't explain. There's an upstairs toy room for Charlie since there's 2 extra bedrooms in our house. He has a big toy closet in there, and the whole room has a bunch of toys like a Lego table, action figures, and such. For the duration of about a month, at different times we'd hear Charlie talking to himself. Not like role-playing talking in his play. We'd overhear him speaking as if he were talking to another person in the room. The first time this happened, my wife wasn't home, but as I passed his playroom, I overheard him talking as if he had a friend in there, and I swear to God, I actually walked in just to make sure he didn't actually have a friend in there. When I walked in, I saw him sitting at his Lego table with a couple of his WWE action figures on top of it, but he wasn't currently playing with any of them. He was just sitting there blankly staring at me. I asked, "Who are you talking to?" He shrugged his shoulders. As weird as it was, I had to assume he was just playing. The next time something strange happened, it was a lot worse. This time my wife was at least home to witness it with me. We were in the kitchen, Charlie was in the backyard playing. We heard him laughing and talking suddenly, so my wife went to look out the window to see what he was doing. Then she called me over to look as well. What we saw was Charlie talking to thin air, as if he were talking to a person. It resembled him trying to show someone who wasn't there how to use the plastic sword in his hand. I expressed to my wife my concern. She said he may just have an imaginary friend. I told her I didn't know how I felt about that. She seemed to feel it was completely normal. Fast forward to like the third or fourth instance. It was 9 o'clock on a school night, approaching Charlie's bedtime. He was in his playroom still. I was trying to be lenient with the bedtime and let him play for a few more minutes. I heard Charlie laughing and talking to his imaginary friend again. I curiously had to take a peek into the room. As I opened Charlie's door, I heard his closet door shut. I looked at Charlie, standing up in the dead center of the room, with his toys scattered around him. I asked him who's in the closet, and something on the inside of it fell. It sounded like a big plastic toy. I asked one more time who's in the closet in a yell. He said George. I swung the door open, expecting one of his little friends in there. Maybe my wife let him have a playdate or sleepover without telling me, but the closet was empty besides his toys. I picked Charlie up against his will and brought him to his room. I told him he was going to bed. Then I told my wife about the closet door closing on its own, and then the toy inside falling on its own. She thought I was messing with her at first, but then she saw I was serious. That night, I woke up to sounds from down the hall in Charlie's playroom. We sleep with the door open. I woke my wife and told her to follow me quietly. We tiptoed to the toy room. Charlie wasn't in there, but a distinct, loud clicking sound was coming from inside the toy closet. I opened it, showing bravery for my wife, and as I did, the clicking stopped. We dug for any kind of electric toys that may have made that clicking sound. Nothing, though. I think that was the night I became a believer in the paranormal. The next morning, I woke to my wife's scream. She was holding our wedding photo. It was cracked right down the middle, not just the picture in the glass, but the frame too. It was cracked perfectly down the middle, separating the two of us. We took Charlie and stayed with my mom for a week. Then, after a week, my wife and I returned to the house. We listed the house for sale, and after a few days of normalcy, we brought Charlie back to the house. But we moved out a month later. I work at a game development company in Orlando, Florida. It was a stressful couple of weeks for me, and I was really pressed for time before a game's deadline, so I had to stay at the office late almost every night that week. It was a rainy Wednesday night of that week. It was completely pitch black outside, with the occasional strike of lightning lighting up the place, and the sound of the rain pouring on my office window was helping me concentrate on my coding. There was one other person in the office at this point, my coworker Chaz. He was finishing up on his work as well. He was also pressed for time on a strict deadline. By now it was easily between 8 and 9 o'clock, and Chaz knocked on my office door before telling me he was heading out. He asked if I was okay locking up the place, and I told him of course. Then he was off on his merry way. I heard the front door of our company's office slam shut behind him, and with that I was alone. Our entire office is in the shape of an L. The entrance is at one end, and my office is down the short line of the L, basically the corner office. I had to keep myself awake as I was starting to doze off, so I went down the hall to the kitchen to heat up some coffee. Just a little bit, enough to keep me going for another hour. I leaned on the counter by the coffee maker, waiting for it to heat up, when I heard this. The sound of a door closing. I peeked my head out into the hall to look and see if anyone was there. I called out, yielding no replies. The door sounded like one of the smaller private office doors, not the heavier front door to the entire office. I left the kitchen to walk down the 2 halls, trying all the doors, which were locked. Then I got to my little hall, and all 3 doors in this hall were shut, including mine. I left that door open 1000%, and there was no draft in here as all the windows were closed. I felt like someone had to still be in the office pranking me. I opened my office door with force, expecting someone to be in there jumping out at me, but no. My office was how I left it. The chair, my computer, everything. It was just a little odd to me that the door closed on its own because it had never done that, but I moved past it and continued my work. The rain continued to hit the window, and the lightning continued to strike about once every minute, startling me a few times actually. Some more time passed, and it was now getting very late to still be in the office. I was content with the progress I made, so I saved all of my work and began closing down my computer. I clicked the shutdown button, then turned off the screen. The screen went black, and then I saw it. In the reflection of the computer screen, I saw behind myself a woman standing there. I don't know how I didn't jump or scream, but I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I didn't turn around. I just got up from my desk, calmly grabbed my bag, pretending not to have noticed, and walked to the door. I didn't look back to shut the door or anything. I walked down the hall until I thought I was far enough away. Then I booked it out the exit of the entire office. I then ran down the flight of stairs to the first floor, then out to my car in the rain. The whole time I was terrified I was being followed, or that she would grab me any second, whoever it was. Once I got in my car, I took a second to breathe. Then I looked up at the window to my office. The light was still on in there, and I'm quite sure I saw a small kink in the blinds, as if someone were on the other side looking down at me. I called one of my bosses, Miranda, at once, and she confirmed no one else should have been there. She said she'd call the night security guy and ask him to check the office. Luckily, I got to go the hell home. Later that night, Miranda called me and said the security guy was in the office but didn't see anyone. I told her what I saw one more time, and it freaked even her out. There's only one camera in our entire office, and it's at the end of the longer hall by the kitchen area. The camera footage never caught any woman walking around the office that night. A long time ago, I did security work in an office building in Midtown Manhattan. It was mid-November, so one of the offices was looking to start decorating their office space with Christmas decorations, which were held in the basement along with other storage. I usually stood in the lobby area of the building just as general security. It was usually an uneventful job for the most part. But on this cold November Monday, my view of this job changed entirely. An employee of this dermatology office on one of the upper levels of the building apparently had gone down to the basement and had reported that all the lights were out and that the elevator wasn't running to the basement floor. This sounded like the electrician's job, until I was also told that there were multiple broken-in doors down there, implying a break-in over the weekend. That's when it became my job to go down there and investigate. Since the elevator wasn't going down to that level, I would have to take the stairs down there. I was going down there alone since I was the only security guard on duty that day. I took a flashlight with me down there since the power was out. I'd be lying if I said this wasn't nerve-wracking going down there alone. On this level was just storage, electrical components, and janitorial equipment. It was a small maze of corridors with different rooms, and navigating this in the dark with nothing but a flashlight was making the hairs on my body stand up. There were different doors in the corridors, which would lead to different storage rooms for many of the different businesses that rented office spaces in the building. And the call turned out to be true. Many of these doors were bashed in. Some of them were so badly damaged that they looked like they were destroyed with an axe. This was more serious than I thought. I was just a security guard. I didn't make enough money to go searching for potentially dangerous people in the basement without a gun. I looked into each room with broken down doors, but each room still seemed to be full with supplies. I couldn't find any trace of theft, but someone clearly came down here with a purpose. I continued looking into the rooms, just peeking in for a second with my flashlight. Then I heard a slam elsewhere in the basement. And suddenly everything went dead silent. The The basement noises I was hearing before, from whatever they may have been coming from, a boiler, the pipes, whatever it was, stopped. And I was now in a dead silent basement where I could hear every last sound. Every footstep I took now sounded 10 times louder. Someone was in the basement still, evident by that slam. It may have been another door. It may have been whatever caused the noises to stop. Stupidly, I called out, "Anyone here?" and my voice echoed down the corridor. I continued slowly back the way I came. I wasn't staying down there another moment. This was a job for NYPD at this point. I was almost to the stairs when I heard this heavy breathing coming up from around the final corner. I instantly knew it to be heavy breathing. I was scared shitless. Why was I put in this situation? I turned off my flashlight and tiptoed just a little closer to look around the corner, and weirdly the breathing stopped. I said one hello, then turned the flashlight back on. Even though the light wasn't aimed exactly in that direction, I still easily saw this extremely tall, hunched over figure facing the wall with some kind of long object that could have been a weapon in his hand. I say his because there was no way a person this big and this stature could have been a woman. I also saw their face turn in reaction to the light. It was this pale, abnormally long face. I think they were bald. Another reason I say it was a man, but I didn't look too long. I ran past the figure to the stairs, screaming back at him that the cops are coming, you need to leave now. I ran all the way back up the stairs, through the basement door, then locked it and called 911. A bunch of NYPD cars came and it was a big thing. At least 4 police officers went down there. I felt pretty useless, I have to say, but removing a dangerous, armed giant human from the basement with the lights off was not in my job description. I was in the lobby when the officers came back, alone. They didn't have that person I saw with them. They couldn't find him. One of the building's electricians came to fix the electrical issues in the basement. It had something to do with a circuit box in the basement being tampered with. With the lights back on, police still couldn't find anyone down there. There are multiple stairways back upstairs from the basement, which he may have left through. Everyone believed what I saw, though. Those doors didn't smash themselves open. I took sick days the next few days, and every night for a week, I'd lay awake, constantly checking around my room in the dark, scared I'd see some giant figure standing in one of the corners. I held my first job ever in 2002, and I worked at a call center during the graveyard shift. The office was in Makati, and it was a new site. The office layout was kind of in an elongated donut shape, with the donut hole being the elevator lobby / main doors, and the actual office space composed of 2 long hallways and 2 shorter ones. It was also a new site, so only half the office was finished, and the other half was still under renovation. So one long half of the donut was a fully operational production floor with managers' offices and a pantry, while the other long half was reserved for things like conference rooms, the nurse's office, storage, other admin stuff, restrooms, etc. And it was all unfinished. The conference room still had concrete floors, and wires were still sticking out from sockets and all that. While the production half was nice and bright and well lit, as any call center should be, the other half was only partially lit. To make matters worse, the guards would turn off the lights completely on that side, since they figured nobody was using it anyway. As a result, people didn't really hang out on that side of the office, and if you needed to use the restroom, you just kinda had to make a mad dash to and from it. 2 weeks into production, and my teammate, who was obviously very sickly to begin with, had a terrible migraine, and I suggested that she tell our team leader about it so that she could take a break. TL then told her to go visit the nurse's office, located in the unfinished half of the office, something we figured out only because of the sign above the door that we see whenever we go to the restroom. I was to accompany her, so that's what we did. We walked to the nurse's office, but found that the door was locked and nobody was inside, even though the lights were on. The door was the type with one of those vertical window panels on it, so we peeked in to make sure nobody was in there. We saw all the medical equipment and a sick bed, a desk, basically everything you'd expect to find in there, except the nurse. Thinking maybe he or she just went on break, we decided we'll just come back later. After half an hour or so, we did go back, only to find that the light at the nurse's office was off. I remember us being pretty pissed off at the thought that maybe the shift nurse had gone home, but we checked the door anyway to see if maybe there would be a sign or note with the nurse's schedule or whatever. I don't know why I did it, but I tried the door handle despite being aware there was no light on, and and I was able to open the door to find that there was no nurse's office, despite the sign above the door saying that that's where it was supposed to be. And yes, that was the only sign. We checked over and over to make sure it was the right room. We were sure it was the same room we visited earlier. But instead of a decked out clinic, we found a room with a small nightlight in an exposed socket that cast only enough light for us to see the walls and floors were concrete. There were no finishes, no beds, no cabinets, nothing. It's like we dreamed up the clinic we saw earlier. A guard approached us at that point, asking what we were doing poking around in an unfinished clinic. So we told him what happened, and he of course thought we were making it up. While we were kind of trying to convince him that we weren't lying, we all suddenly stopped talking when we felt the temperature just drop. We shivered, our hair stood on end. My heart started racing, and nobody could speak for a minute. Finally, my teammate burst into hysterical tears, and the guard then nervously shooed us away and locked the door to the supposed nurse's office. We were escorted back to our team's bay, and we explained what happened to our team leader. He pretty much just sat there stunned as he listened to us. Since my teammate wouldn't stop crying and was starting to hyperventilate very badly, they had to send her to Makati Med. The incident was never brought up again. If you're a fan of horror, which I know you are, then you'll love Shudder, which is a video streaming service catered specifically to horror fans. And what better time of year than right now to curl up on a chilly fall night and watch a good scary movie? Shudder has the biggest collection of any horror, thriller, or supernatural films that you could think of, and you can stream on all of your favorite devices. Shudder's also home to many exclusive original movies such as Prisoners of Ghostland featuring Nicolas Cage and Great White, a killer shark movie perfect for any Jaws fans. And you'll never find yourself running out of things to watch, as new films that'll keep you on the edge of your seat are added weekly. I personally have always been a big fan of found footage films like the Blair Witch Project, so it was great for me to see VHS 94 added recently, which is yet another exclusive to Shudder. So get started streaming the best horror, thriller, and supernatural content. Shudder's expertly curated collection includes must-see titles like Vicious Fun, The Mortuary Collection, and PG Psycho Gorman. Plus all the best horror documentaries and the hit Creepshow TV series from executive producer Greg Nicotero of The Walking Dead. To try Shudder free for 30 days, go to shudder.com and use promo code NIGHTMARE. Links in the description. Back when I was 17, my friend told me about this deep web drug website called Dream Market. It was where he bought things like weed and Adderall. He had what he referred to as a trusted dealer, whose information he sent me to buy from. I don't condone doing anything like this. I was simply just young and stupid. I thought buying Adderall would help me with my senior projects. Anyway, I went about doing that. However, this purchase made me intrigued to continue browsing Dream Market and seeing what else one could buy. And I saw this range from counterfeit bills to real guns. This got me more intrigued to view more of the deep web. I found some link somewhere on Dream Market that led to, I guess, what was a drug chat room, because it was just a lot of people seemingly advertising the drugs they were selling and their rates. I found it interesting. Some people would post random .onion links, and I clicked on one. It brought me to a black page with the title Home Base at top in large text. Underneath were a bunch of other random links. I clicked on a bunch of them. Most never loaded, probably being dead links. A couple loaded. One was another chat room. This one didn't have a title. There were like 3 usernames signed into the room, all random looking, just like the assortment of random letters I inputted just because I didn't care. The chat's previous history showed. A few people were talking in another language, then another guy was typing in English. That guy was still in the chat room, and actually, before I typed anything, he typed yo directed at me. I typed yo back. He said, "What you looking for?" I typed back, "I don't know, LOL. He asked how I found that link, and I told him just from some site called Home Base. I asked if he had any cool links, as it was my first time on the deep web. He types back, LOL, then sent a link. He didn't say anything else. I clicked the link, and it took a little while to load the page. It loaded the black background first, then a little text box near the bottom, and the last thing that loaded was a video. At first I thought it was like a pausable video, but it looked to be some kind of live streaming video. The video was black and white, and it was of a dark room with some mannequin-looking thing sitting in a wooden chair. There was this grainy effect to the footage that made it feel more surreal and unnerving. I genuinely couldn't tell if I was watching a live video or not. Then, as if it were some kind of movie jump scare, what I thought was a mannequin in that chair suddenly jumped up and sprinted towards the camera, and a loud, staticky screaming sound accompanied it. The apparent porcelain mask that the person was wearing was so close up on the camera at that point that all I could see was black. I went back to the chat and asked that guy what the hell this was. He replied, "Just keep watching, LOL," and then he left the chat. I went back to the other tab, and the video or live stream window was gone. It was now just a blank screen with a text box on the bottom. The text box didn't let me type anything though. My Tor browser window suddenly closed without my doing. Then a deep, raspy voice was coming from my speakers. It was someone obviously trying to disguise their voice. The voice said my first name and claimed they had all my files. Then the webcam window popped up and I saw my face on the screen. I turned off my laptop and went to the Geek Squad at Best Buy where I bought the computer. The guy I spoke to's guess was that he was able to somehow get the basic info off my computer, like my account name. He recommended I factory reset the computer. He helped me with the process. I didn't have anything I was worried about losing on there anyway. It was a relatively new computer. If you're ever on the deep web, I heavily recommend using some kind of VPN, even for the alleged safe websites. I'm 24 years old, and I'm from a small town called Yarmouth in Nova Scotia, Canada. I keep my social circle very small, just my few friends and my coworkers really. I mention that as a point in saying I don't really know anyone who would be out to get me in any way. I browse Reddit a lot in my free time. I'm an active poster. There was this one night when I pulled up Reddit on my browser out of boredom that I had a new message. Not unusual, as I'd have people messaging me in reference to my posts quite often. It was a message request from some random account, a now deleted username. The message said, "Check your email, your spam folder specifically." I replied back, "Huh? Why, who's this?" In the meantime, I opened up my Gmail and went to the spam folder. There was one email that stuck out from the rest, titled in all caps, "I know who you are." I opened the email and it was basically a paragraph full of my personal information, including my full name, my Reddit password, my home address, along with threats. Basically, whoever sent the email was asking for a one-time payment of $5,000 through Bitcoin to a specific Bitcoin wallet address. My heart was basically in my throat. I had that terrible feeling of helplessness and like the entire world was collapsing in on me. The first thing I did was cover my webcam with a piece of tape. Secondly, I went back to Reddit to see if the user ever answered my message. They did not. I went to report the account on Reddit as quick as I could, as if that would even do anything though. I replied to the email, copy-pasting the exact message I sent to the Reddit account, asking who this was, how they got that information, and if this was a prank. I got an email back around 5 minutes later, in all capitals, saying, "No, it's not a prank. We have all your information, including where you live. So your best course of action is to do as we say, and you'll never hear from us again." Obviously, I was not going to shell out $5,000. I don't even make a lot of money to begin with. I contacted all of my friends, asking if it was any of them, like begging them to just come forward now before I'd call the police. None of them admitted to it, so given that I threatened calling the police, I knew it wasn't any of them. I tried to think of anyone at work who might have issues with me, but really I get along with everyone at work. I chalked it up to my password somehow being stolen by malware or a hacker, and through that they somehow got the rest of my information. The main question was, do I pay the money? And that was absolutely not happening. I forced myself to go to sleep and left my laptop off the whole next day. I used my desktop instead after getting home from work. I didn't sign into Reddit or anything though. I did however change my password on all other websites and apps on my phone. I finally signed into my laptop late that night because I was just so bored and curious. Curious but nervous to see if anything had changed and if I'd gotten any new emails. I signed on and everything on my computer still looked normal. So I went to Reddit and saw the user who messaged me was now deleted. So I went to a subreddit which talked about computer hackers and scams and such, and I posted my experience. At some point, I noticed the taskbar at the bottom of the screen turned darker. Curious, I minimized all my windows, and my desktop wallpaper was different. I knew right away what it was though. I recognized the outside of my bedroom window. The white frame of the outside windowsill was in the picture, and the flash of the camera also caught me laying in my bed sleeping. Some seconds later, a pop-up window appeared, along with the Windows error sound. Inside the pop-up error window was a message saying the word pay, with a winking face following it. I closed my laptop screen and forced the computer off by holding the power button. I also pulled my blinds down and called my parents. It was still early enough to do so. I told my dad over the phone that some hacker had my info, and he came right over with his truck to help me load any valuables I could think of into his truck to stay with them for a while. Before we drove off from my apartment, my dad yelled like a madman into the night sky, basically threatening whoever was hacking me. It was definitely a scene, but I was too preoccupied with worry to be embarrassed by it. I stayed with my parents for weeks and used my mom's computer when needed. I blocked that email address that sent me the original email. I finally got back to my apartment a few days ago. I'm still scared every night to hear a knock at my window or get another threatening email. I haven't brought it to the police yet, as I'm hoping it's all just a bluff still to get me to pay. I'm also hoping it's over and that they've given up. My name is Miranda, I'm 25. I've had my share of experiences with stalkers and men harassing me. Social media has made that far too easy these days. I once got a suspicious email that I should have known better than to open. It was asking me to click a link to some random page because I was being sued by some random company. I clicked the link, and soon after that my computer started acting all glitchy and unresponsive. Even after restarting it multiple times, it was just laggy and slow, and random sound effects would play once in a while. I was certain my computer had a virus, but I wasn't sure to what extent it would go just yet. The next day, I had a bunch of friends texting me what's up with that Instagram post and asking if I was the one who even posted it. I panicked and opened Instagram, but I was logged out of my account. Someone was hacking me, this confirmed it. If they had my Instagram password, I had no idea what else they could have. Apparently the picture posted on my Instagram was some stupid cartoon meme. It was extremely embarrassing. Minutes of freaking out later, my Snapchat started blowing up. It was from some random account that just added me. They were spamming me to Snapchat call them, so I did. When they picked up, I saw like a quarter of someone's face. It looked like a young guy in his 20s. I could tell he was smiling, that was the creepy thing. The way he said hello was so long and stretched out. I was pretty frantic, asking what he wanted in return for my Instagram back. He started telling me some really creepy shit. He said he sees me every day and that he thinks I'm really pretty, and that this was the only way he'd get my attention. I didn't know what to say. He said he'd give me my account back if I would just be his digital girlfriend. As creepy and weird as this was, I said yes in a heartbeat just to get my stuff back. He told me the password to get back onto my Instagram account, and as soon as I changed the password, I set my profile to private and put a story up saying that wasn't me, I was hacked. I asked this guy for his name and what other info he had on me. He said I could just call him John, and that he could get all the information about me that he wanted. He said this with a smile too. I could see it in the fourth of his face that he would actually show. He refused to show the rest. I played nice the whole time, knowing this guy's a sicko. I managed to get him off the call by telling him I'd snap him tomorrow. I then told all my friends about it and asked what I should do. They all unanimously said I should activate 2-factor verification on my Instagram account and then deactivate the account and then block him. When I did all of that though, he didn't take it too well. An hour later, I got a new Snap user blowing up my Snap. I knew it was him, but I opened the snaps anyway. And it was him again threatening me, saying he knows where I live and blocking him was a stupid thing to do. I showed it to my parents now because it was getting serious, so my dad called the police. I didn't block the guy's Snapchat yet though, and I'm glad I didn't. As my parents and I were sitting in the kitchen waiting, I got a snap from the guy. It was a video. I waited a few seconds before opening it. It was a video of him sitting in his car in front of our house, with the caption, "Don't block me again." My dad ran outside in a fit of rage. We tried to stop him, but he wouldn't. But the car wasn't even in front of the house anymore. The guy probably waited until driving away before sending that snap. I'm just gonna say the police did absolutely nothing. They seemed clueless on the matter. But there's not much police could do in hacker situations anyway, apparently. However, I did send a snap of the police car back to the guy, and put a caption, "Fuck with me again, you'll be arrested." He opened the snap and immediately blocked me, so I'd say it worked. This story has a happier ending than most, I guess. But the amount of info some people can get from you online is absolutely terrifying. I started talking to this girl years back named Christina. We met through mutual friends, and after a while of commenting on each other's Snapchat stories, I decided to just bite the bullet and ask her out on a date. It was mid-July, so options for things to do were abundant. Namely, the beach and anything outdoors was an option for a first date. There's a beach by me that allows trucks to drive onto it with proper permits, and I frequently go there still to this day with my pickup truck. It was a night that neither of us had work the next day, so we decided to go to the beach and have a little bonfire with some drinks. On a weeknight past 8 o'clock, I knew next to nobody else would be on the beach that late, so it was what seemed like a perfect first date in privacy. She lived only 5 minutes away from me, so I picked her up and then we stopped at a 7-Eleven where I bought some firewood and other supplies for the fire. Then we headed straight to the beach. To be honest, I'd never started a fire before that, so I was scared of embarrassing myself. But on paper, it sounded like a good idea. I pulled us onto the trail that leads to the beach. It's a decently long trail, and at one point there's a fork in the path where 99% of people turn right to the main beach, but I often go left because it's a lesser known, smaller but more private section of beach. We went left, and when we got to the beach section, we were the only people there. I had my brights on and could see basically all the way down the empty beach. Not another truck in sight. I pulled my truck up on a sandhill, then parked it, and we started to unload the truck. I dug a hole with my shovel to place the firewood and some smaller fire catching sticks, and honestly, I couldn't get a fire to catch. I tried for 20 minutes and couldn't do it, and I called it quits. It was embarrassing, but we laughed about it, so we just chilled in the dark for a little bit, drinking the beers we brought. For a while, all we heard was the waves hitting the beach, but Christina was the first to point out that she heard something else in a whisper. I started to listen closer, shifting all my attention to that, and I heard what she meant. It was this whistling sound. Not like a bird, it was a person for sure. Christina and I looked at each other with telling faces of how freaked out we were. The whistling was extremely close. Since we had no other light, I went into my truck and turned on the headlights, and I heard Christina scream. We both saw the back of a man's head hurrying out of the tall beach grass on the little hill of sand above my truck. He had likely been there the whole time, watching us for some reason. I yelled to get lost to the creep. I went up the little hill and tried to follow him, but right away I lost sight of him. There was tall beach grass everywhere. He could have been hiding in any of it. I took out my phone to use its flashlight and got on my toes to get a look over the grass. Looking back, I don't even think I wanted to find him, so I don't know why I didn't just get in the car right away and leave. Christina called me back to just get in the car and leave. Then I heard the whistle again. It sounded way too close for comfort, like within 10 feet from me. Christina heard it too, and she once again begged me to come back to the car. I did. I went back down the little hill and started packing the chairs and bags into the bed of my truck. As I was getting into the truck, I stopped and heard a humming from the same spot. It was clear by this point someone was deliberately trying to scare us. We got in the car, and I switched my lights off and turned the engine on. I sat there for a few moments, waiting, as if I knew that whoever was in the grass would come look at us after hearing the engine start and lights turn off. And I was right. I turned my lights back on, and for just a brief moment, a man's face could be seen looking through the grass into my truck. The light being turned back on made him hide back in the grass. I was tempted to get out and beat the guy up, but Christina stopped me and convinced me that he may be sick in the head or armed, or both, and that we should just leave. I agreed, and we left the beach, the whole time looking behind us to make sure we weren't being followed. It was an incredibly tense and scary drive off that beach. With the amount of crazy people out there, I have no idea what that man's intentions were, but nothing about that entire encounter was normal at all. When I was younger, my family rented a beach house for a weekend one summer. The house rental was cut extremely short, and this is why. It was our first day there. We went to the beach and then went out to eat for dinner. The sand dunes were very hilly near the house, and that night, my brother Joey and I came up with the idea of sand sledding down the hills. We found a couple big cardboard boxes in one of the closets in the house, so we cut pieces off the boxes to use as sleds. Our parents didn't mind us going out in the dark as long as we wouldn't stray too far away from the house. We found what seemed to be the tallest part of the sandhill and started riding down the pieces of cardboard box as if they were sleds. It worked pretty well, actually. When Joey made it to the bottom, I'd say his third or fourth time, he called up to me, "Tyler, what is that?" I didn't see what he meant, so I slid down the hill again and looked at what he was pointing at. It was something in the ocean. It was this black object sticking out from the water. The moon's reflection on the ocean was just enough to see this object, but not know what it is. It looked like something was definitely floating in the water, though. We were a little freaked out and were too scared to go closer and look at what it was, so we walked a little further down the beach to look for a different hill. We found one that wasn't as tall, but it was still near enough to the house. My brother slid down the hill first. I stood at the top watching. I looked out to the ocean again, and I saw that black object in the water again. It's as if we didn't even move, or as if it followed us. I yelled at Joey to look at the ocean again. He looked and probably saw it right away, because he ran up the hill to me freaked out. We were discussing what we thought the thing could be. Maybe we didn't move as much as we thought we did. We stared at the object for a while, and we could see it was bopping around a bit. We looked down the beach at the house we were staying at. It wasn't too far away, so we decided to get a closer look at this floating object. We thought maybe it was a dead animal floating in the water. We couldn't have been more wrong. As we got maybe halfway to the water, the black object floating around bopping in the water started to rise, and we realized it wasn't floating at all. A person's body was revealed as they stood up at a towering height, arms now flat at their sides. It was a person's head this whole time. We ran to the house and slammed the door behind us, yelling to our parents. Our parents seemed confident that there was no threat from someone going for a night swim, though, even after we said they were following us in the water. Our dad went out to the backyard deck with the lights on and looked around the beach, and when he didn't see anyone, he told us we had nothing to worry about. It wasn't until later that night that we heard our mom scream from the living room as Joey and I were in the room we were sharing. We jumped out of our beds to rush outside and see what it was. As we entered the living room, our dad yelled at us to go back to our room, but we didn't listen right away. They were looking at something outside. We walked over to see what it was they were staring at. Close enough to see him, a naked, smiling man on the backyard deck, waving. My dad then physically moved us back into our bedroom and told us not to come out. We heard everything, as our dad was screaming threats of calling the police at the man. Then there was a loud bang from the glass of the back door, accompanied with the sound of our mom screaming. Our dad yelled at our mom to go stay with the kids. She came into the room and tried to comfort us, while we heard our dad calling 911, all while hearing periodic bangs on the glass. Our dad is not a big guy, and he's far from a fighter, so the chances of him going outside to confront that man himself were slim to none unless it was absolutely necessary. This went on for a few minutes before the bangs stopped and our dad seemed calmer. A bunch of police cars came to the house. There were more police officers in the house than I can remember counting. My brother and I were asked to describe what we saw on the beach to help tie the whole story together. Our parents to this day tell us that the most likely explanation was a child predator on drugs. It was a very sick and disturbing thing for our entire family to go through. In fact, 12 years later, it's still cringy and disturbing to think back on. And yes, the obvious answer to the obvious question, did we leave after that encounter? Yes, we did. And our parents got their money back. We ended up staying at a nearby resort so as not to waste the weekend. But obviously, we were all a bit shaken up after that. When I was 20, my girlfriend Stevie and I wanted to go to this local beach fireworks show for the 4th of July. However, all the main beach parking lots were completely full, and it was absolute chaos trying to find parking. Eventually, we ended up driving further down the road to a less crowded, almost empty parking lot. People were parked in the lot sitting on beach chairs in the parking lot, apparently ready to watch the show from there, but Stevie and I didn't want to do that. We walked onto the beach with our blanket and drinks. We had to cross a tunnel under the overpass to get to the beach side, away from the parking lot. The beach was surprisingly empty. Apparently, we were the only ones who thought it'd be a good idea to walk to the main beach. We started our long walk. We walked for literally 20 minutes until the fireworks started shooting into the air. We weren't that close, but it was better than nothing, and we were tired from walking. We had the beach to ourselves where we laid down the blanket. We were literally just making the best of the situation. The fireworks show was decently long. About 10 minutes into the show, I heard voices from behind us. I turned around and saw a few people in the distance. They were standing facing the fireworks. Nothing strange there, probably just more people watching the fireworks show. We sat for another 10 minutes or so, around the time the show ended. We were being eaten alive by mosquitoes by that point, so we picked all our stuff up and started speed walking back. We passed a few tunnels, and although they all looked the same, we remembered that the one we crossed had 2 garbage cans right next to the left wall. I could see a young man approaching us from the darkness ahead. He greeted us and asked us for help. I slowed my walk, but didn't come to a complete halt, because I was instantly wary of this guy. He looked to be one of the guys I had seen in the distance earlier. He was pointing into the tunnel next to him, saying his friend was injured and he needed help, but that he didn't have a phone on him. Stevie seemed equally sketched out as me. I continued to inch away from the guy while holding her, gauging this young Hispanic man who appeared to be in his mid-20s. I asked him where his friend was, and he said in the parking lot beyond the tunnel. I looked into the tunnel, which was completely pitch black. There was no way in hell I was going through there. This seemed incredibly off. I apologized and said we're in a hurry, and pulled Stevie along with me as we continued to walk quickly away. The man's tone changed to more annoyed, angry. He called me a piece of shit as we walked away. I didn't even turn around to acknowledge. I just whispered to Stevie to keep walking. I'd look over my shoulder every few seconds, checking if we were being followed by him, and eventually I realized we were. He, along with 2 other people, were tailing us from not far behind, already indicating that the man lied about his so-called injured friend. We were about to be jumped, I could feel it. I told Stevie to run ahead to the tunnel with the 2 garbage cans. I knew if we both ran, that it would probably trigger the group of men behind us to chase us. She moved ahead in a low-key, non-obvious jog. I realized the men behind me were getting closer. I wanted to give Stevie a little more time to get ahead to the car before I would book it. By the time I'd made it to the tunnel, I turned around again, and the 3 men were almost right on top of me now. One of them started shouting, "Hey, come here." Stevie was trying to call me, but I couldn't pick up. As soon as I got to the entrance of the tunnel, I felt that they were about to run up to me and grab me, so I booked it through the tunnel, and I heard their footsteps right behind me. I sprinted on the concrete wall barefoot, but I endured the pain in the heat of the moment, in fear for my life. I made it through the tunnel to the parking lot, which was lit up by streetlights, thank God, and somewhere in the tunnel the 3 men stopped chasing me. The parking lot was now empty besides 2 other cars, and my car, which Stevie was already in with the lights on. I ran to get in the car, and I looked back one final time to the tunnel, and saw 2 of the 3 guys standing probably 10 feet into the tunnel, watching. I got in the car, and we drove out of the parking lot and down the parkway, and honestly, I was never so relieved to see the taillights of a traffic jam from the thousands of people leaving the main beach parking lots. I have no clue if we were going to be mugged or murdered, but clearly those people were there that night with a plan. I'm glad we didn't fall for their trap.